right, we are live. Welcome back to Reasoning.
It's as good as waging war against Allah and His Messenger.
Audio seems to be maybe slightly glitchy. Not quite sure what is up with that. Anyway, glad that you all are here today. We're joined by Mary to continue our look at Stephen Shoemaker, among a couple other people's hypothesis that the Kathisma Church, a Christian church in the Jerusalem area, was influential, or perhaps even the origins of early Islam.
Foundational to
Yes.
the Quranic Marian narrative is their argument. So the source of the Quranic Marian narrative, like who Mary is and giving birth to Jesus and everything else, comes from specifically Kathisma Church, which is 3 miles outside of Jerusalem, in between Jerusalem and Bethlehem.
So we're looking at that theory. We've been looking at that the last couple of weeks, covered some of the actually main arguments, but not the ones that you typically hear from people who are repeating this theory at a popular level. We're going to be looking at some of the more popular arguments today, things like the architecture, the presence of a Zamzam well, hence the title of the stream, and what else am I missing, Mary? I know there's a couple more things. Palm images. Yep. That's one of them.
And a supposed sacred water, too.
So there you go. We're going to be looking at those things. I did pin a message here reminding people that, or perhaps informing people for the first time, not everyone was here last time, obviously, that I have turned on channel memberships. If you join within the first 30 days of me initiating that, which gives you about 2.5 more weeks, YouTube will pay me an extra $10. So you join at the $2 level, I actually get $12, well, minus the processing fees, but that's only on the $2 portion, so $11.50 or so is what I would actually get from your $2 donation. So excellent time to sign up for that. And this Sunday, I'm going to try to have a members only live stream where we will discuss things like what videos you want to see. You can ask me any kinds of questions. We'll try out some new emojis. So one of the benefits of having a channel is that you get custom emojis. I have added a couple new ones since last time, and I tried to make the existing ones a little bit clearer, but added a couple more new ones as well. I have access to 13 of them, I think, now, because Jack Ray donated so many memberships that were at a higher level. I think we can do 13 custom emojis. So we'll need some ideas. We can try them out live, see what they actually look like, because it's one thing to see what it looks like on my screen. It's another to see what it looks like live. And Jack there just put all of the emojis into the chat. The ninja one, which I tried to add, perhaps I need to like put on a white background or something, because it's kind of black on black.
Really tell.
I wasn't thinking of that, but that is supposed to be Mary in a ninja costume there. So we'll have to try something to make that visible. Right now, not very visible. I did make the cat and dog a little bit bigger, so hopefully they're a little bit more clear, and added a new false emoji as well. But be taking ideas for those and other content you want to see this Sunday at a members only stream. And so Professor Yahoo asked, do Patreon members get to join the members only live stream too, or should we quit Patreon and join YouTube? Well, I don't want you to quit Patreon, certainly, because they're a lot better to creators than YouTube is. I don't know how that works. If I set it to members only, if I give someone the link, if they will be able to join or not. I'll try that. If that doesn't work this time, then next time I'll just set it as unlisted rather than members only, and post the link on a members only message so that people can see it. I'm not quite sure. I haven't done this before, so I don't really know how it works as far as YouTube goes. Morgie says almost every video I watch starts with aid for Gaza. I'm still not giving any money, but you are taking their money because they paid for that advertisement by watching it. So appreciate that. Jack started us off with a super chat.
Who ate the apple? You ate the apple. The whole apple. Yes, the whole apple. You ate it. But a small seed, you left it. You put it back into the earth. What happened? Allah, through His power, caused that to grow and to give you how many apples? Thousands.
Everyone's favorite one. We haven't seen that one in quite a while, actually. It had been a number of streams since we saw that one. So thousands of apples for you, Jack. And it says TikTok time to rock. And indeed it is. But Catholic 3 DOD pointed out that we are 9 minutes late. Did have some tech issues getting started. Snoopy says, no doubt YouTube will take 45% of the $10. And no, they won't, because it's not coming from member funding. It's coming from their pockets to encourage creators who have been invited into the program to create channel memberships. So this time they actually won't be taking any of that.
Yes. In future months they'll take, but this month they won't.
Yeah, and it's 30% on channel memberships rather than 45. It's 45 on ad revenue, but 30% on channel memberships, which is a lot. It should be more like 10%. I mean, come on, people are donating. They're not subscribing for YouTube. Ads, I have no problem with them taking half of it because they're generating the ad revenue, right? They're finding the sponsors and whatnot. But donations, I really feel like they shouldn't take more than 10% that it takes to actually pay the credit card company to process it and a tiny bit of profit. But, you know, whatever. The $10 comes out of their pocket. It will take them quite a long time to recover that money. You'd have to be a channel member for a couple years at the minimum level for them to break even on that deal. So definitely encourage people to take advantage of that opportunity. All right, enough about me encouraging everyone to become channel members. Let's get into the content here. We got the archaeology of the Kathisma Church, and that did not load. So let me reload the screen here.
All right.
Hopefully it'll load the second time.
Yep, and we are starting out with a diagram of the Kathisma Church. This is actually the diagram as it was in the 8th century. But if you subtract the little bits that stand out beyond the main, why am I going blank? Wait 1 second. Give me 1 moment. Okay, yeah, it is apps. Okay, I just had like this momentary freeze or something. I'm obviously not from a denomination that has appses, but if you look at the buildings beyond the main apse, those did not exist at the time. The general shape of the center is what was originally built, but if you recall, we talked about last time how the central dome fell down, it collapsed. None of these ancient works, even until the modern era, there was no structural engineering. There were builders who were working by rules of thumb only. And usually these rules of thumb work, but you didn't have your soil engineer come in and find out whether or not your soils were going to be able to support the structure you're going to build on it. So sometimes your rules of thumb did not work so well and things fell down. And this was one of the cases when the rules of thumb did not work so well, and the original supports for the dome were apparently shifted and not in the same way, and the dome collapsed, and then they rebuilt it, and they rebuilt it slightly wonky and smaller and less impressively. And that also kind of indicates that the prestige of this location did not end up becoming what the original builder who was just a wealthy woman. It was not a state-sponsored building. What this wealthy woman who wanted to build this, it did not end up having the prestige or the number of pilgrims really attracted to it that they had anticipated, which kind of goes against the idea that it was central to any group, that it was so unimportant that they built it back wonky. But we had discussed before about Pseudo-Matthew, which has the story of the Holy Family who were. Oh, my microphone's popping. How about here? Let me know, because I'm hoping that it isn't your. How do I sound to you, Thaddeus?
You sound fine to me.
Oh dear, I hope it's not
That,
grabbing it.
yeah, that's.
Going it out, because it was popping a little bit last time when I went back to listen last time, and I hope it's good. Oh, that's
Well,
funny.
let me try.
That's hilarious. Ah, um, let us know whether or not it's working and there's less popping, because we really do want to get good sound quality on this if we can.
Yeah, so I adjusted. Whoa, that's bad on me. All right, I adjusted some of the sound settings. Hopefully, we're both at approximately the same level, and Mary is clearer
Oh,
now.
say a little bit low, that's all. But other people are saying that I'm heard clearly, so
Yeah,
tell
well,
us if it's
you were definitely low at first,
okay. So
but I
hopefully now
turned
we're going.
you like so it was on auto balance, and I turned off auto balance, but then I turned you up. So hopefully it's good now. Sound is now down, but I don't know if that was before or after, right? Because
Well,
of the
you
delay.
you just turned your own sound down, so I don't know if you turned my sound down
Right.
too.
Uh,
So hopefully everything's kind of evened out. Hopefully it's good.
from my visuals, we look to be at the same level, but obviously I'm not hearing us. I'm only visually looking at the size of the sound wave.
Okay. So let us know if it's good, and I'll respond to some things that Houston Euler are saying. So he mentioned he joked, so there weren't any tall buildings to throw rainbow people off of. In fact, there were tall buildings, they just collapsed sometimes. He also noted that occupied second floor in buildings was an innovation after they figured out how to handle the smoke from indoor cooking fires. That's being said a lot now, and it's partly true and partly false. First, there are entire societies in which you didn't have indoor cook fires. Nope, they're saying that we're both too quiet.
We're
So let's
both
turn this up a
quiet.
little bit. Very quiet now.
That's not what it looks like.
So,
See, I have a feeling before we were too loud and we were
ah,
probably clipping, but if
so
they'd already adjusted their volume,
maybe tiny bit up. I
I
don't
mean,
know.
I can turn it up a little bit,
I
but
had to turn you all the way up to hear you well. So you're at max volume for me right now. So it's probably a little bit low. Um, so there are entire societies that did not have indoor cook fires where it's hot most of the year. For example, in Rome, there were not the cook fires were not inside of enclosed rooms. At least one side of the room was open and there were only ground floor fires. You weren't allowed to have fires in the upper stories, the apartment complexes, the insulae that they had back then. You weren't allowed to have cook fires in them. You had to eat at public cook kitchens and pay for cooked food there. Similarly, in the Levant and in Arabia, people did not have indoor cook fires. They cooked there. It's even warmer, so they cooked out in the open patio slash courtyard area. So all of your food is going to be cooked out there, and you won't have indoor cook fires, except you might have a brazier in the wintertime, which would periodically fall over and set the entire city on fire, which is something that Europeans noted was very common in Islamic lands, that their entire cities would get set on fire in winter because people are trying to stay warm. Um, but in addition to that, with a two-story building in Northern Europe, you still would have two-story buildings. And in Japan, both, what you would have is a two-story section over the kitchen, and then parallel to that would be other two-story buildings that would not be directly over the kitchen area, and would not receive the smoke in a direct way from the fire. The fire would filter out through the roof materials of that two-story open section, and people would just have slightly smoky homes all the time. Now, in terms of having warm rooms and having things like that, yeah, you did have to have an actual chimney of some sort, chimney technology, to have more elaborate rooms. But that is massively oversimplified whenever people say this. I don't think that they, like, you'll find it on all the history channels. It's really popular right now. It's not entirely. Aisha did not mean to keep the goat indoors. It was her neighbor's goat. It kept sneaking in. The goat has an entire villain arc in the Ahadith, and I love it. Because at first you're like, what's this goat doing there? And then you find out that the goat frequently raided the house, and it's hilarious. All right. So they are not saying, so in the story of Pseudo-Matthew, Mary rested on her way to Egypt at the Kathisma. The Pseudo-Matthew story, it influenced both the Piacenza Pilgrim and Abbot Daniel. Piacenza Pilgrim was the earlier guy who was before the Islamic conquest, I believe about 570. Abbot Daniel was after the Islamic conquest. Was he the early 11th century guy? I think so. Anyway, this influenced their ideas of what the Kathisma about. According to the earlier one, Piacenza Pilgrim, this location is where Mary rested on her way to Egypt, and that's geographically impossible. In the other, then this is after everything had been destroyed, so this fake spring is gone, and so any memory of it is forgotten. It's where Mary saw the two men, which is actually where it is in the text. Saw two men, one laughing, one crying. That would actually fit with the text, whereas the other one, while they're borrowing that story from the text, it's geographically impossible. Now, Shoemaker and Shoemaker both propose that the Kathisma is the source of the narrative of Pseudo-Matthew directly, and the source directly of the Quran, rather than both Kathisma and the Quran borrowing from Pseudo-Matthew. So Kathisma, for them, this story existed. It was taught at Kathisma, and then the Quran and Pseudo-Matthew borrowed from the story that already existed in this place. And they want to insist that the version of the story that was taught at Kathisma was the one where Mary rested on her way to Egypt, but they want to remove the Egypt part of it and claim that that was an alteration just of Pseudo-Matthew. They argue that this must be true because originally this was supposed to be the seat of Mary before the nativity. So they look at the geographical impossibility and don't go, hey, they've changed the story of what this is for to try to bring more importance after the first story didn't stick. So instead, what they say is that there is this proto story that we actually have no true evidence of, that Mary did rest here on the way to the nativity, and all of these events in Pseudo-Matthew happened on the rest on the way to the nativity. They also rely sneakily on the seat of Mary being the location of the parturition, meaning the place where she actually gave birth, or else really, really close to it in some secret original account. Even though the Proto-Evangelium of James denies it, even though Pseudo-Matthew clearly denies that this is the location, but that is what they're arguing. Now, this is not what happened. It never was. These stories were never conflated there. One story swapped out for the other. And this happened in the 6th century, and I believe that this story was swapped out before 538, because when they rebuilt it with a fake spring to bring in the story of Pseudo-Matthew for the first time, where they're resting on the way to Egypt, and there's a miraculous spring, and two palms bow down and give food to Mary. And so that spring is only introduced during the reconstruction, which finished in 538. And so probably during the time it was down, the people who were in charge of rebuilding it, the abbot there made the decision to change the story about the reason for this location, I guess because the pilgrims weren't very impressed by it and didn't like to stop by it. So now the Quran, which took the liberty to transport the palm narrative to pre-birth, it's the only source that's ever done this. Only the palm narrative transports, or only the Quran transports palm and associates it to things that happen before birth, the birth of Christ. And when it does, it uniquely brings in Greek mythology. There is no such conflating at the Kathisma. The Quran uniquely hears something about palms, knows something about Jesus, does something, and goes, palms, a baby. Oh, I know a story about palms and a baby, and steals something from Greek mythology. So Fazal, I dealt with the fact that he had access to this last time very clearly, and I proved that it was in fact before Muhammad's birth that this was written. Piacenza Pilgrim could not reference something that did not yet exist. In its final form.
Yeah. So he says, how could I have access to Pseudo-Matthew if it was written in a Forai language in a Forai land?
Well, I mean, he had access to it through oral storytelling.
No one's claiming he was reading the text, right?
No,
literally
he absolutely was not reading the text because he didn't get it right. He got it wrong, and this indicates that he is hearing oral stories, portions, fragmentary oral stories, and he's borrowing portions of it. Okay? So he is...
And Houston puts this well. He says the same way he had access to the Tanakh, Talmud, Seven Sleepers of Ephesus, Romance of Alexander. Or I could say the same way we have access to, say, the Odyssey of Homer, right? Translation. People knew multiple languages. Even, I mean, there's no guarantee Muhammad didn't know multiple languages. He could easily know multiple languages.
Well, he did actually, according to Islamic sources, he knew Ethiopic because his nurse, who was the closest thing that he had to a mother, was an Ethiopic slave. So she spoke it. So
yeah, I was going to say that was the norm, right? That's been the norm throughout most of world history, is for people to speak multiple languages. It's not like some special skill reserved to a few people. It's what most people throughout world history have been able to do. But even if he didn't, other people did, and they tell stories, and they could hear it in one language and retell the story in another. So really not very bright critique.
Yeah, right? It's the same way people learn anything orally.
Yep.
One person who speaks two languages and hears something in one language can tell a person about it in another language. The fact that Muhammad got it wrong is evidence that he could not have possibly had access to the original source because it's confused and unintelligent. If he had access to the original, he would have treated the material in a more coherent fashion. Now, here is the supposed proof. This is a parallel of Pseudo-Matthew side by side with Surah 19 about the event of Mary giving birth. So in Surah 19, starting in verse 22, it says, so she conceived him, that's Mary conceived Jesus, and withdrew with him to an eastern place. And the birth pang surprised her by the trunk of a palm tree. She said, would I had died ere this, and become a thing forgotten. But the one who was below her called to her, nay, do not sorrow, see thy Lord has set below thee a rivulet. So this is Jesus speaking audibly through her belly, in her womb. He's speaking and saying, nay, do not sorrow, see thy Lord has set below thee a rivulet. Shake also to thee the palm trunk, and there shall come tumbling upon thee dates fresh and ripe. Eat therefore and drink and be comforted. And if thou shouldst see any mortal say, I have vowed to the All-Merciful a fast, and today I will not speak to any man. And I just want everyone to know how stupid this last line is. So she supposedly has vowed a fast and she will not speak. But she's about to eat and drink, and therefore she's not fasting. And if she sees a man, she is to tell him audibly that she's not going to speak to him, which means that she has spoken to them. So I just want everybody to let that sink into your mind, that this is the logic of Allah. So you do the opposite of what you have just declared yourself that you have vowed. All right, Pseudo-Matthew, about the flight to Egypt. This is not about birth. The previous one is about birth. This one is about the flight to Egypt. So in Pseudo-Matthew, it says, and it came to pass on the third day of their journey, while they were walking, that the Blessed Mary was fatigued by the excessive heat of the sun in the desert. And seeing a palm tree, she said to Joseph, let me rest a little under the shade of this tree. Joseph therefore made haste and led her to the palm and made her come down from her beast. As the Blessed Mary was sitting there, she looked up to the foliage of the palm and saw it full of fruit, and said to Joseph, I wish it were possible to get some of the fruit of this palm. And Joseph said to her, I wonder that you should say this when you see how high the palm tree is, and that we have nothing wherewith to refresh ourselves. And that you think of eating its fruit. I am thinking more of the want of water, because the skins are now empty, and we have nothing wherewith to refresh ourselves and our cattle. Cattle just means beasts. So, in old-timey language. So it refers to their donkey. Then the child Jesus, with a joyful countenance, reposing in the bosom of his mother, said to the palm, O tree, bend your branches and refresh my mother with your fruit. And immediately at these words, the palm bent its top down to the very feet of the Blessed Mary, and they gathered from it fruit, with which they are refreshed. And after they had gathered all of its fruit, it remained bent down, waiting for the order to rise from him who had commanded it to stoop. Then Jesus said to it, Raise yourself, O palm tree, and be strong, and be the companion of my trees, which are in the paradise of my Father, and open from your roots a vein of water which has been hid in the earth, and let the waters flow, so that we may be satisfied from you. And it rose up immediately, and at its foot there began to come forth a spring of water exceedingly clear and cool and sparkling. Now, you might notice that the entire context is different. And no, they are very common, and we have already shown. Fazal claims that these stories are very rare. There's no way Muhammad is getting these stories by oral transmission. No, they are very common, because we already have evidence of pilgrims talking about this story, which the pilgrim had not read. And furthermore, guess what language the pilgrim spoke? The pilgrim spoke Latin. The pilgrim clearly did not speak any Greek. He is being told by his tour guide of these stories that had not yet been written down in the Latin language. And yet, this pilgrim, who only spoke Latin and did not speak Greek, somehow was able to understand a story because it was told to him by someone else in the language that he understood.
Clearly a miracle of the law.
Yeah.
But notice the logic here, right? If something is not well known, it's impossible that anyone could know it. So when there was only 4 copies of the Quran in the entire world, it was impossible for any Muslim to know the Quran via oral transmission, according to Faisal's logic. Just so everyone knows, Faisal has declared that the origins of Islam is literally impossible. Yep. There is no way for any Muslim to learn the Quran until there are thousands and thousands of copies of the Quran in the world.
Yep, that's approximately correct. That's what he's arguing here. So I want you to notice the elements. First of all, it's very obvious that the first is derived from the second. The second is a fuller story, and it has a more cohesive and coherent narrative. It does not have a baby speaking from the womb. And it also makes sense. Like in the first one, she's in pain and crying out and is upset. And then his solution for her birth pangs is that she is to eat and drink, because that solves your birth pains somehow. Whereas the other one, they are fleeing.
Well, as long as you're drinking camel urine.
Yeah, and they are fleeing, and so during their flight, she has become hungry and she's become thirsty, and her concern is hunger and thirst, and so that is what's answered. There's also a really interesting detail. This really, really harps on the fact that the palm tree bent down and it stayed down until it was ordered to rise. So that is a very important point to the author. He is emphasizing this point, how much the palm tree bent its top down. Not it bent its top down so that she could gather the fruit. No, it bent its top down to the very feet of the Blessed Mary. Big emphasis on the bending. And then it remains bent down, waiting for the order to rise. And we should expect to have some sort of reason for why is this so important? Well, we'll find out why it's important. This comes from something else. And what it comes from is not what? Is not pagan history. Now, what Muhammad has done is taken it and gone palm tree, baby, woman. I know a pagan story about this. That must be the real story. So we are going to go into what these sources are. All right. So here's the intertextual elements. First of all, you have a palm with a rivulet together with the miracle of a speaking Christ child and also being fed dates from the tree. And that means these things all together means it's very unlikely that the Quran does not draw from Pseudo-Matthew in its local form. Remember that we already know that these details pre-existed Muhammad's birth even. That these were existing stories. They pre-existed Muhammad's birth. They are interfaced by a number of other texts. This was a story that existed before Muhammad and is a false story. It is an apocryphal story, but the Quran takes from it. It must have taken from it because of the elements that are so clearly the same. However, the account of Pseudo-Matthew, it occurs when Christ is already born, so there are no weird talking womb babies, and it happens on the flight to Egypt. Also, the Quran would know that Mary would have a husband if there was direct contact with this text, rather than a garbled oral story. So there is not a direct contact with any text about Mary and Jesus and the nativity and the events afterwards. One of the reasons that Muhammad removed a husband is because Muhammad is such a pervert that he could not imagine a man not having sex with the woman he could legally have sex with. And trying to explain why she could be or would be a virgin would be something that was not acceptable to him. But in the context, he was not called out by the pagans around him for erasing Joseph either. Why? Because the people around him were just not well educated about Christianity. And that includes the people who were taken as children, who were slaves, because they were taken as children and didn't have that good of a memory of what they had been taught. Now, Jesus does not flee in the Quranic account because that would refute the Quran's expulsion theology. Prophets are never expelled from their lands in the Quran. Now, I know it's ironic that Muhammad was expelled from Mecca or fled it, but for years and years, Muhammad spent all of his time insisting that the prophets challenged the pagans of their own culture, and the pagans sought to expel the prophets, and the pagans were never able to do so. That is the narrative that Muhammad taught until the moment that he ran away. Until then, Allah was
He
going to
voluntarily ran away, so he wasn't expelled.
But nobody even momentarily runs away. Nobody leaves. Nobody runs away. Instead, the people are locally overthrown by Allah. They're destroyed by Allah. And then those who are left, who are the followers of the Prophet himself, if he wasn't killed, they take over the land. And if no one's left, then it's just completely abandoned. That's how ruins happen. That is the story of Muhammad. That's what he taught. So even if Muhammad had heard this story as a flight story, at this point in his theology, he would have changed it and assumed that his informer was wrong. He would change it to Mary alone fleeing while pregnant because she wouldn't know the expulsion theology. She is not a prophet. She doesn't know that she's going to be fine. Note that the Christian theology, on the other hand, is sojourner theology. So we are all sojourners. We are all people who are living in a land that is not our own, who belong to a different kingdom. We belong to the kingdom of God. We are sojourning here until the new heaven and new earth. And that is the opposite theology of the Quran's anti-expulsion theology. And again, that shows how little theological knowledge Muhammad had. So,
All right, so got a couple questions from the audience for you. From Morgie, what is the dating on Pseudo-Matthew again? As in, when was it written?
so the version that has survived fully written out is quite late, has later additions to it that's like might be as late as 800 AD, but all of the elements are referenced by people much earlier. So other things much earlier than the copy that we have that survives talk about the events that happen in Pseudo-Matthew. Therefore, the story of Pseudo-Matthew and its elements are earlier, and it
And
is
for our
most likely
purposes, we're
that
talking, we're talking primarily about the story that appears in the Quran. The text has other things in it, but we're talking primarily about this palm tree bending down story.
Yeah, and this palm tree bending down and the things and the spring swelling up has to be early because of what it is interfacing with, which I'll talk about in a moment. People from that late would not have had any memory of this other text that it's interfacing with anymore. It has to be, while they still considered this text to be an important text, this other thing has to be written to interface with it. You cannot write something to interface with something that has been forgotten. So, finally,
And then related question from Mick here, could Syriac infancy gospel be possible or not old enough as it has Pseudo-Matthew contained in it, or at least the same stories?
I think that one's even later, and it does take many of the elements from it, and it may be a more direct source. Some of the elements may be a more direct source for a number of Quranic things, like the clay bird is only found there, but we don't know exactly what form the person who told Muhammad about this had heard it himself in, but we do know that these elements are there, and that the way the poem is written, this textual excerpt is interfacing directly and directly confronting another text. And so those particular words were written by someone who had access to and believed to be insightful, authoritative, or at least correct this other text that we're going to talk about in a moment.
So just real quick here, Snoopy says clay bird, referring to the story in the Quran and pre-existent story about Jesus as a child bringing clay birds to life.
Yeah, that's from the infancy gospel of Thomas, which the Syriac infancy gospel combines aspects of that one and this one both, I believe.
But not what we're discussing today. Morke what does the word Zam even mean? And someone provided the answer. John provided the answer. The name Zamzam originates from the phrase zoom zoom, or however you would pronounce that, meaning stopped flowing, according to Wikipedia, because this is the phrase repeated by Hajar during her attempt to contain the spring well, the miraculous spring that came to meet her thirst. She apparently wanted to stop, according to Islamic tradition, and that's where the name comes from, unless Mary knows otherwise.
That's what they claim. It's a false etymology. No one really knows what it means. It's like nonsense sounds, but that's the false etymology that is assigned to it, which is whatever.
All right. So got a whole bunch of gifted membership events. I'll just highlight the first one from Jack Ray. He gifted one membership, and then he's going to up that a couple times later. And the program wasn't running, but we don't need that anyway, so thank you for that, Jack. I'll get the thing restarted. It says it couldn't connect to the YouTube API. Well, shame on the YouTube API. All right, Mary, back to you.
So our genius Fazal again is like, oh, some people said that they wanted to expel the prophets, so therefore the prophets were expelled. No, sweetheart. The point is that the pagans always want to expel the prophets. So pagans want to expel prophets and fail, and instead Allah destroys them. So Lut supposedly has the same thing. Even Moses, there are tons of conversations of them going, ha, what does this Moses want? Oh, he wants to expel us from our lands. No, we shall expel him. Even though what he actually wanted was to be sent out. There are still these expulsion texts in there with the implication that they will fail. They want to expel the prophets and they fail. The prophets do not get expelled in Muhammad's narratives up until the moment he decides it's time to run away, and then it's fine to run away. But Allah's totally going to smite them and destroy them, and then they'll come back. Then when Allah doesn't do that, then it's fine. If we kill them all, then we're actually doing what we're actually Allah's arm and power if we kill them all, because Allah just never got around to it. And the idea behind that is because Muhammad was so dumb that he thought that the Emperor Titus was a Christian and had destroyed the Jews in Israel as a Christian, and that was how the Jews had gotten their comeuppance for trying to kill Jesus and failing. So, no, I did not say the Quran never talks about it. You need to turn on your ears. I repeatedly said that the Quran has expulsion theology, in which the pagans say that they are going to expel the prophets, and they fail. That means that is the expulsion theology of the Quran. The Quran denies that prophets are expelled or have to run away from their own lands. That's what the Quran says. And that's what Muhammad taught.
We can clearly see why Faisal is a Muslim. He seems to be incapable of understanding basic sentences.
Anything.
Right?
All right.
You say that according to the Quran, people try to expel the prophets. He says, see, the Quran says they expelled them. Look, they said, we want to expel you.
I know. This man is just so special. All right. So the third point is that the detail of the palm and a mother call to mind a completely different story, that of the birth of Apollo and, in later versions, Artemis. In the early stories, it's only Apollo, to Leto, and this is not Leto from Doom, this is a goddess. This is a goddess, not a science fiction character. My dog is currently lying on his back begging for belly rubs. He's not going to get any, however. But it is Muhammad. Muhammad is the one who conflates these two totally different stories. And now that this classical myth and other classical myths are in circulation in Mecca at this time is evident from the Sisyphus trial being brought to the Islamic hell too. This had already happened. Muhammad had already claimed that one of his opponents was going to be condemned to a steep slope in hell. He took the Sisyphus legend and put it in the Islamic hell. He borrows freely from pagan sources, and this is another borrowing from pagan sources. Now, these Hellenistic mythical roots, they belong only to Islam. Now, there is a man named Suleiman A. Murad, and he wrote an article called From Hellenism to Christianity and Islam, the Origin of the Palm Tree Story Concerning Mary and Jesus in the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew in the Quran. He thinks that it took a long time for Christians to decide that Jesus was born in, it shouldn't be Jerusalem there, in Bethlehem. So they stole a birth under a palm story from mythology, and then the Christians changed location to the flight to Egypt, while the Quran adopted the supposedly earlier palm birth narrative. His entire argument hinges on the assertion that this palm flight narrative came into Pseudo-Matthew independently from and later than the composition of the Quran. But we've already shown that the palm flight narrative was accepted before Muhammad was even born, and that the Eastern texts engage with several parts of the Pseudo-Matthew narrative in ways to defy its conventional dating and circulation. Whenever I talked about the Pilgrim of Piacenza and what Abbot Daniel wrote, and then thirdly, that lection of Jeremiah also engaged with Pseudo-Matthew and the standing baby Jesus in Pseudo-Matthew, and is interfacing with it to refute a standing baby Jesus. Now, to be clear, Murad did not originate the idea that it took a while for Christians to settle on Bethlehem as being the location for the birth. By being wrong about the traditional location of the tomb of Rachel, because the Piacenza pilgrim got it mixed up, other gullible scholars made this mistake first. The tomb of Rachel is hard by Bethlehem, not 3 miles away. It always has been. And so, like, people who were not clear on their geography is difficult for people. Like, spatial things and chronology is just like really hard for historians, and it shouldn't be. This should be foundational. If you're going to be a historian, you got to get your geography right. You got to get your chronology right. But this is really difficult for people, including historians. Now, Kistler, who is a scholar that I quote frequently, is brilliant. He correctly identifies the motif of a bending and straightening tree as being anciently Jewish and eschatological. Goodness. This is found in the Epistle of Barnabas 12:1, a very early Christian polemical book against Jews who reject Christ, and it's regarded as pseudo-epigraphal because it was never widely accepted. It is either 1st century or very, very, very early 2nd century. It is extremely early and is very likely to actually be 1st century, though considered, again, pseudo-epigraphal. Now, here is the passage from the Epistle of Barnabas, talking about why Christ is the true Christ, why he's God, why everyone should accept Christ as God. And he says in Barnabas 12:1, in like manner again, he, that is God and Christ, he defineth concerning the cross in another prophet, who saith, and when shall these things be accomplished, saith the Lord, whenever a tree shall be bended and stand upright, and whensoever blood should drop from a tree. Then thou art taught concerning the cross and him who that was to be crucified. Now, Barnabas 12:1 is taking this quote of the tree bended, stand upright, and blood dropping as being referring to the cross. The cross was bent over when Christ began bringing it up to Golgotha, and then later it was brought up by Simon of Cyrene. But then it was stood upright on Golgotha, and then blood dropped from the tree. That is how Barnabas is defining it. Now, Pseudo-Matthew is going, no, we're going to take this a step farther. We're going to talk about this tree bending and standing upright in context with Christ's nativity, after his nativity during the flight. That's why there's all this emphasis on how the tree is staying down and it's not straightening up on its own until it was commanded to. Now, this Epistle of Barnabas 12:1, Christians are here going, what is this quote? And when shall these things be accomplished, saith the Lord, whenever a tree shall be bended and stand upright, and whenever so blood shall drop from a tree. You're all going, I don't know this in my Bible, because Barnabas is quoting a Jewish pseudo-epigraphal text. It is the Q42 Ezekiel, which is found in Qumran and is also mentioned by Josephus. So this saying concerns the eschaton in the original, the end of the world in the original 2nd Ezekiel, Q42 Ezekiel, and the end will only come after these things happen. So Barnabas is saying, hey, you Jews, you believe that this is a prophet's words, that this will happen. And this happened when Jesus was crucified. So the eschaton is connected to Jesus's crucifixion, which validates him as the Messiah. And Pseudo-Matthew goes, hey, we're going to go and make this even more literal, this tree bending and standing upright, and included that in there as part of the story to literalize this even further. So the Christian source for the bending palm, it is not related to a birth account at all. Instead, it's related to a Jewish tradition concerning things that may take place for the eschaton. By having the tree giving Mary fruit, the tree has a reason for bowing, and then explicit in the Christian text to straighten up again. That's the point of the bowing. They invented a reason to have this bowing happen. Thus, there is cannot be any reference to the pagan event of Leto giving birth to Apollo while grasping on to onto a palm tree, because that's not what's being referenced. What's being referenced here is a specific existing Christian text referencing a Jewish text. It has connections, and it has nothing to do with any of these pagan stories. Okay? So, Leto's story now gets mixed up with the Christian account precisely because Muhammad didn't know or rejected the context of his informer, most likely didn't know it. He didn't know the point of the palm bending, and he pulled from his memory another story with a mother being comforted by a palm tree in conjunction with water, keeping the Judeo-Christian detail of the tree giving fruit and losing the bowing completely. There's no bowing anymore. It's just shaken. So, and apparently Mary has to shake the tree while she's in labor, because that's what I really want to do while I'm having contractions, is shake a tree. And then while I'm having contractions, eat during contractions. Not before, not in early pregnancy. She's not in early
so she's
birth,
really frustrated.
right?
She grabs the tree. It's like, ah!
I guess, because in early childbirth, you eat, you drink, you do all this sort of stuff. But she's here going, oh, I wish I could die. So she's at least in transition, right? You're not eating in transition. You're not eating in transition, guys. But apparently, she's forced to shake this tree and eat and drink, because otherwise she won't give birth, because her baby is telling her in her womb to do so, and he's a prophet and making her do this. All right, so let's go to the pagan narrative.
Before you do that, let's have some brief comic relief here. First from Christianity was destroyed by its own people. Islam, though it is in its weakest state and has not had strong cadres in the last 100 years, is still the most convincing without dispute. And so I asked him,
what's convincing about
he thinks it's true. And then someone else told me that I was being ridiculous by asking, and he's like, Thaddeus went from saying, ask me anything, to saying, prove Islam is true. I don't know what he's talking about me saying ask anything, but he's the one who claimed that Islam is convincing, so I asked him why. That seems pretty reasonable to me. And then we got Faisal here, who somehow determined that the point you're making here is that Mary was expelled from the land. No, that was a simple aside about Muhammad and his theology. So, it had nothing to do with any of Mary's actual point.
Okay, so you are very stupid because you only read the Quran. Let me correct some things to you. Mary was indeed expelled from the land, meaning she fled in fear. She left so she didn't die. Okay? She left so she didn't die. Left so she didn't die, along with Joseph and Jesus, who had already been born. That would be against the expulsion theology. You should not have to run away, according to Muhammad. That is being expelled. According to the Quran, no prophet would ever do this, even though Muhammad turned around and did the exact same thing. He spent years saying he would not do. Why? Because he was saying that he wasn't going to be like Uthman ibn Huwayrith, who was driven out, who wanted everyone to convert to Christianity, and then he got driven out by his own people, and they were going to drive out Muhammad. He's like, no, you won't do that, because I'm a true prophet of Allah. You can't drive me out. You can't drive me out. You can't drive me out. Oh, now I'm running away. So running away is being driven out. It is the same thing. They did flee. It's called the flight to Egypt. In the Bible, in the Injil that the Christians had with them, as the Quran talks about, Jesus and Mary and Joseph are fleeing. They're on a flight because of evil people wanting to kill their baby, who is the incarnate God, right? She did not leave it willingly like Jonah, and Jonah also did not leave anything willingly. He got dragged to where he was. And Jonah is not from the people of Nineveh. Muhammad is very foolish and thinks that he's from the people of Nineveh, and he isn't. So, Kartona, I am talking about the Quranic story right now, and the Quran and how it takes from pagan myths. So you're like, oh, you have to make a difference. You have to make a decision between, between what the Quran says and the authoritative things and other things that Muslims do. I'm not talking about other things that Muslims do. I'm talking about the Quran and how it takes pagan legends, because Muhammad got reminded of a very common pagan legend and incorporates them into your holiest book and makes it part of the story. So, moving on to the actual narrative. Leto's narrative uniquely contains three elements that the Quran also steals from. First, laboring agony. Second, birth under a palm tree and grabbing the tree. Third, the pains of labor being made less in some way when she comes to that tree. In no Christian source does Mary have birth pains, much less does Mary wish for death. That is heretically offensive, to have Mary wishing for death as she is giving birth to the Savior of the world. And the very thought that Mary would have pains in birth, when the early church saw her as the second Eve, who undoes the curses that fell on all humankind, including on women in childbirth, would be utterly heretical, unacceptable. That would get you kicked out of a church so fast your head would spin. Yet, because he is borrowing from this pagan source, suddenly Mary has this laboring agony. Now, here are early sources and some of the later sources. One of the earliest sources that has one of the fullest accounts that's all the elements are repeated again and again. There's a long list of tons of places that refuse to have Leto. And then it says, so far roamed Leto to all of these various places, in travail with the gods. So she's in travail, birth pain, who shoots far, that's Apollo, to see if any land would be willing to make a dwelling for her son. But they greatly trembled and feared, and none, not even the richest of them, dared receive Phoebus, another name for Apollo, until queenly Leto set foot on Delos and uttered the winged words and asked if it would let her give birth. And then it says yes, lots of stanzas to get through this part, so I'm condensing it. But Leto was racked 9 days and 9 nights with pangs beyond want. So she's in birth agony for 9 days and 9 nights. Why? And context, it explains that Hera had not let the goddess of childbirth know that she was in labor until the other goddesses brought her along. And as soon as Alethea, and that's goddess of labor, the goddess of sore travail, set loose on Delos the pains of birth, seized Leto, and she longed to bring forth. So she cast her arms about a palm tree and kneeled on the soft meadow, while the earth laughed for joy beneath, and the child leapt forth into the light, and all the goddesses raised a cry. Then she washes him in water. So we have water, we have palm tree, we have birth pangs, we have all these big elements of this pagan story that Muhammad then borrows from, because he doesn't know the original. There's some poetry from the 6th or 5th century BC that says, Lord Phoebus, when the Lady Leto gave you birth, gripping the palm tree with her slender arms. So again, it's being repeated. Callimachus in 240 BC. So didst thou speak, and gladly ceased from her, Leto's, grievous wandering, so painful, saddening wandering, and sat by the stream of Inopus, which the earth sends forth in the deepest flood of the season, when the Nile comes down in full torrent from the Ethiopian steep. So again, water, we have a stream of Inopus. And she loosed her girdle and leaned back, her shoulders back against the trunk of a palm tree, oppressed by grievous distress, and sweat poured over her flesh like rain. And now we even have these kind of words of her speaking in agony. And she spake in her weakness, Why, child, dost thou weigh down thy mother? There, dear child, is thine island floating upon the sea. Be born, my child, and gently issue from the womb. So again, very close parallels here. Alien, who is writing in 235 AD, he notes the Delian tradition that the trees which nourish people on Delos are the olive and the palm. And then he said, when Leto took hold of them, she immediately gave birth, which she had not been able to do so before. And Plutarch's writings, which is in about 119 AD, he declared that the olive and palm are actually springs, not trees. Again, we have water and tree detail kind of mixed up. The salient parts of the most common form of the narrative are that Leto was cursed by Hera to not be able to give birth on land, and so she wandered in the pains of birth until she found Delos, which at that time in the story was a floating land, and so was not properly land because it was floating. Finding relief at last next to a palm tree, occasionally switch out for an olive or with an olive added in, and surrounded by water or near a spring or river, she gives birth. Palm plus water plus mother caused Muhammad to add details unique to the Leto myth. Note how close the echoes of Mary's words are to Leto's and the Callimachus version. Just less heretical. Muhammad managed to make it even more heretical. And now note that the myth was well attested even in the 5th century. Stephanus of Byzantium recorded it and talked about it. Now, returning back to Mossad, the scholar, in any case, the palm tree story in the Quran, 22 to 24, it's an obvious reworking of Leto's labor in the Greek tradition. It is about a distressed pregnant woman, Leto/Mary, who seeks an isolated place, Delos/a remote spot, sits by the trunk of a palm tree next to a river, and Napa/stream, and delivers a holy child, Apollo/Jesus. Now, he also claims that the similar birth tradition of Buddha might have been a source for these, but that's impossible. And in contrast, this tradition concerning Buddha could very well have come from the Quran or independently from the Leto myth, because there was a good deal of contact between the Greeks and the Indians at this time, before these things had gotten written down. So, all right.
All right. So we won't take any stupid comments from the audience. None of that, from the Muslims in the audience. None of them were even warranting bringing up. That's how bad they were. But Peter here says many Islamic skeptics, well, as Wikipedia would say, that's a weasel word. You don't say many to try to make it sound more important. But anyway, at least someone has said this, right? Think Mount Scopus and Mount Moriah in Jerusalem, where the original Safa and Marwa in the Zamzam story is the Kathisma Church.
It's nowhere close, and that it absolutely cannot be Mount Scopus and Mount Moriah. The story they claim, the story makes more sense then. The story is that she is running back and forth like 6 or 8 times. No one is running back and forth Mount Scopus and Mount Moriah 6 or 8 times. That's like climbing Pikes Peak in terms of effort while holding a child. They're trying
regardless
what they're doing. Hang on. So what the one Islamic skeptic who made this claim is Dan Gibson, and he's trying to rescue the story, and I have no idea why. It never happened. It's made up. It's pretend. What Muhammad did is he took a pagan activity of Mecca and made up a really stupid reason to try to make it authentically monotheistic because he wanted to keep it. And we have evidence that this is something that he did, because whenever they passed a tree, a pagan tree that they used to hang things on, weapons on, and as a form of worship, the people requested that they can continue to do that, and were waiting for Muhammad to make up a monotheistic reason why they would hang weapons on this holy pagan tree. But then Muhammad was like, no, you can't do this one. But for a lot of the pagan traditions, he just made up stories to get them to keep doing them. Yes,
Mhm.
the story is stupid. The story is stupid because it was a pagan ritual that someone could complete in like less than an hour, basically,
Mhm.
that was part of a larger pagan ritual that Muhammad made up a reason for. No, it doesn't make sense. And there is no plausible connection between the etymology of Scopus and Safa and Moriah and Marwa. They do not have
They still have the
etymological
same
connections
letter,
at all
Mary.
whatsoever. So,
Yeah, I was gonna say, regardless of whatever else you think about the story, and yeah, it's certainly made up. It doesn't reflect actual history. Uh, but she's running a small distance, right? She's quickly running back and forth between probably two small little hills, like you find in Mecca in the story. I'm not saying it happened historically, but as far as the story goes, yeah, I think there's nothing odd about what Muslims believe about it and the location of Mecca. I would say, if you're thinking that this should be like two grand mountains some distance apart, then you're not really understanding what the story is saying. Like she's quickly running back and forth, like, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no, you know. So it's not like something that would take all day.
oh, Robert said that he's willing to debate me. I didn't know that. Well, I would be thrilled to debate Robert. I'd really like to debate him, but I have to actually read his book
Yes.
first to find out what the story is. I haven't actually listened to that. I was going to read his book before I watched his video, so I just kind of stuck it I put it on my watch later list. I haven't seen it
Mm-hmm.
because I haven't
Yeah, so
even ordered the book
I'm not
yet.
that familiar with Robert Spencer's arguments either. I
Some
mean,
of
I did
them
watch.
I know from his history of jihad, but I don't know his arguments overall. They haven't been the ones that have gotten as much attention, so they haven't been the ones that I have addressed. But I think it would be really, really helpful for many people for it to
Mhm.
be something
Yeah,
that we
I
talk
would
about.
definitely. So I mean, Robert's been on this channel
Oh, there's a
before. I
limited time.
certainly
Thank you.
can. I certainly can contact him and ask if he'd like to have a formal debate on whether Muhammad was a historical figure, addressing his arguments in his book. Obviously, if Mary hasn't looked at the arguments, she'll want time to prepare. But
Well, we are going to
absolutely.
add this to cart, and we are going to buy it.
And apparently this came up on David Wood's channel. I watch some of his content, but I don't watch every single live stream. And he said, I wouldn't debate Mary.
Oh, that's funny. All right.
Uh-huh.
All
And
right.
then we got Mr. Mahmood, who loves to be persecuted, so he's back in timeout.
He likes being. I think he's just a masochist, honestly. I think he likes being hurt. He's like, oh, maybe they'll come here and hurt me again. I need it. All
Yeah,
right, I bought his book now, so I can actually read it.
and Mulhead had got me. You know, we're just very scared of Ultimate Board.
Yep.
So that was weird when he came last week, right? It was like, oh, you've run away from me. Read all my emails. So then I read his
I'm
email,
like
and
again.
then
All
he ran
right,
away.
and then he ran away. Yep. And he hasn't emailed you again.
No,
So
because and just to be clear, I don't remember if I did it live on the air or after, but I did email him and said, since you showed up in the chat today, let's schedule the debate. And yeah, he hasn't replied back, strangely enough.
yeah, I'm just making a funny. Yep. Oh wait, is it working for? It might be working for everybody else again if I just reset it. All right, Oh, look, it is. Yep.
Oh, there it goes.
So
So
just
it just went, it just
reload.
went from my screen. It just went from no data to excellent connection
Oh
instantaneously.
wait, it appears to be. Oh no. It's buffering again. Yep, it's my black dog. Oh no, bad connection. All right. It looks like we're back. Okay.
I think it should be back.
So we're
Yeah.
we're back with the cat. Well, last time we saw the cat. All right.
All right. So we think it's back. Hey, yeah, stop using KFC Wi-Fi. That's definitely the problem here.
Yep.
Um, So Jackson Lamb, if you want to know the sources of what we're actually talking about, pay attention.
Yes, because
If
I
you
am
read-
mentioning sources like the Homeric hymn to Delian Apollo, Suleiman a Murad. Like I'm mentioning like
But
sources.
he's probably not listening.
No,
And
he's not
he's
listening.
certainly just repeating a meme without even understanding what this
Yep,
meme
it's
means.
supposed to
So
mean. Yep.
let me explain it, because I don't know how much came through with the buffering issues and how much didn't. So you'll see Muslims say the Gospels are anonymous, no one knows who they're written, and you'll occasionally find a not very knowledgeable atheist or someone intentionally being deceptive saying the same thing. But when a scholar says that the Gospels are anonymous, all they mean is that the text does not say, I so and so wrote this with my own hand, which is true. It doesn't say that, which means, technically speaking, in the technical usage of scholars, it is an anonymous work. But so is the Quran, the Hadith, the Sirah literature. 95% or so of all things written in the ancient world are anonymous by that standard. It does not mean we have no idea
Including the
who wrote
Quran,
something.
by the way.
Yeah,
The
including the
Quran
Quran, right?
is anonymous by the if you want to apply the same standards to the Quran as are applied to that you are applying to the Injil, the Quran is an anonymous text.
Mm-hmm.
It does not announce who the author is. It declares that Allah is the one who's dictating it, like Allah is talking all the time, and you kind of presume it's Allah, but it is technically speaking anonymous, and only in some parts would you come to a conclusion that there's a person called Muhammad who is involved in some way, but that doesn't tell you what all the rest is from. It is anonymous. The Quran is anonymous by your own standard. And yes, pretty much all modern books are anonymous, because we don't have a section in modern books that says, hello, my name is Mary Harb. I wrote this cozy mystery. Like, you just publish it. It just has your name on it, the same as the Gospels. It's part of the title, and the so and so by so and so, right? Right? That's what you have. You don't have like a part where you talk about how you're the author. And while a few texts in the ancient world had introductions that talked about the author,
Mm-hmm.
many didn't.
Yeah, very
And
few did.
you can call it anonymous if you want, but it's a little bit silly to do so. All right.
And then
So,
he said, yes, but the Quran can be traced to Muhammad. Well, yeah, but the Gospels can be traced to, say, John for the Gospel
Yep.
of John, or Matthew for the Gospel of Matthew. Technically anonymous, but we know who the author is.
Yep.
According to the unanimous testimony of all of ancient history, all people who could have possibly known agree on the Gospels. They don't agree on other texts, like, for example, Pseudo-Matthew. There are many different claimed authors for texts like that. Those texts, we actually don't have any idea who wrote them, although it's certainly not Matthew the apostle. Every single manuscript of every single gospel either has the title according to Matthew, according to John, or whatever, or that portion of the text is missing. There are none that say so-and-so, who isn't one of those four, wrote this text, right? There's no dispute among anyone. Modern times, scholars thinking they know better than the testimony of the texts. Well, guess what? By that, no
by
one
that definition,
who thinks that.
So anyone who thinks that you can't trust the authors of the Gospels also does not believe that there is any credibility to the assertion that the Quran said either, because it's just
Well, so we're beating around the bush by explaining what the terms actually mean. Good to know. And then he declares, right, this isn't how things actually work.
Hey, hang on, we're buffering again. We are buffering again.
Oh, gosh. But see, you and I
here we go.
Hear each other perfectly.
Yep, we do. We seem to be back. Well, no, you were sounding bad to me too.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Okay, so it probably is on my end then. If you also were not hearing me, I'm always hearing you clearly though.
No, I'm not always hearing you. That's because it's on your end, I think.
Yeah.
So, Jackson, you're just going to lie. The Qurans are not all the same. You have many different versions of the Quran, and they're traced back to the prophet by calling upon the witness of people. Hang on, by calling upon the witness of people who said that the Quran of Uthman is not the real Quran and that you are not to recite it. So they put Ubay in their chain of transmission whenever he explicitly said that this is not the Quran, do not recite it, do not give up on my mushaf. And you're saying that that's not true, that's just a lie. All right, let's move
All
on
right.
to
So
the actual
before we
topic.
do that, I
Get
need
on
to
topic.
I need to finish my point here, right?
Yeah.
So he said it was a revelation, and if you don't believe it, then falsify it. It's simple. Instead of yapping, you could do the falsification test. I was unaware that there was a definitive falsification test that you can apply to all texts. I suppose you're referring to the Quran Surah Like It challenge. Well, that's been met 100 million times. It's met in the Quran itself because jinn write a surah, right? And they're
Yep.
not Allah. So what a stupid, idiotic test that is. But it's been met by countless other people.
Yep.
And it's a stupid, idiotic test.
Well,
to
what's
begin
even
with,
worse,
right?
what's even worse, you
Can you
cannot
write something
say,
like Matthew?
yeah. Well, what's even worse is that the people who recited the Quran the best and knew it the best from Muhammad could not agree on what the Quran was because it was so indistinguishable from what human beings created. So whenever they would have variants, there were disagreements on whether or not one word or a different word came from Muhammad, and they did not say that both came from Muhammad. They said one came from Muhammad and you guys are corrupting the text. And yet you cannot tell through the spectacularness of the language, tell which is from Allah. That means that the standard is stupid.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
So
Jackson, you need to tell me now what you're going to be put in timeout if you don't. Tell me now which is the true Quran, the one that says Muhammad was surprised, or the one that says Allah was surprised, and tell me that the other text that says the opposite is not the Quran, because there are canonized readings chosen by Mujahid that say both. One of them says that Allah was the one who was surprised. The other one says that Muhammad was the one who was surprised. And
right.
you are saying that they say the same thing. So which one do they actually say?
He doesn't
Throw
know
out the other
any of
one.
this. He
No,
doesn't
he
know
doesn't.
any of this, Mary. He's just saying things like "you're liars," blah blah blah. So let me actually finish talking to him here. Right? He says you can't falsify the Quran, therefore you're lying. That doesn't logically follow. That's a non sequitur. Sorry, that even if
That's
I
okay.
couldn't falsify the Quran, which I can, but even if I couldn't, that wouldn't automatically mean I'm lying. Those two are not logically connected to one another. But here is my challenge to you, Jackson. Email me, thaddeus@reasonanswers.com. Link is in the video description. Set up a time and we can discuss whether I can falsify the Quran or not. I can falsify the Quran in approximately 500 different ways. All right? That's not the subject of this stream. But let's just do one. What we presume to be your falsification test, in fact, is a falsification of the Quran because it's not a valid test. Allah declares that if the Quran wasn't written by God, then no one could duplicate it. And if it wasn't written by God, then people could duplicate it. But guess what? You can't duplicate a symphony of Mozart. Does that mean Mozart was God? According to the Quran, yes. Or the test is invalid to begin with, which then falsifies the idiot author who thought that was a good test. See, it's not that hard to falsify the Quran. We'll have no further discussion on this today. You're going to email me, thaddeus@reasonanswers.com, and set up a time for a live discussion. If you do any more off-topic comments, you'll be put in timeout. And if you're not listening, if you don't have your sound on, well, that's not my problem. All right. Let's get back to the actual subject of this stream now.
So, Jackson, if you are not on topic, I'm going to put you in timeout. All right. Now, the question is, what is required for the Shoemaker thesis to be true? That the Quran takes an authentic Christian thing that had all of these pagan elements in already and use that. For this to be true, the proto-Muslims had to have intimate contact with Kathisma. So much so that they know more about it than any living Christian apparently did, knowing that it used to be associated with Mary's rest before the Nativity, before being changed to Mary's rest on the flight of Egypt. And so these Muslims did what the Christians didn't and combined the two out of sheer cleverness because they knew so much more than anybody else who was alive. Oh, and also it is associated only with the assumption by the time of the conquest. So two lost parts are recovered, and its present belief of what it represents is entirely ignored if their thesis is true. Not only that, but there's a secret association of the Kathisma with the place of Mary's parturition, which literally no Christian source ever references, but is somehow true. And furthermore, the proto-Muslims knew this too, or at least is an authentic historical tradition. And the proto-Muslims somehow knew about this. Thirdly, the pro-Muslims latched onto extremely specific details in a homily that was once read at Kathisma, the part about Aaron, the brother of Mary, and another passage read at a totally different church in a different century, that Eastern place, but that would never give the listener the ideas that they came up with. And yet somehow these two things are specific to Kathisma and are somehow like continually taught there for them to pick up. Yet, proto-Muslims missed the fact that it was the Kathisma of Lady Mary Theotokos, the mother of God, the God bearer, and did not engage with the fact that Mary is called Mother of God or Theotokos until well into the development of their holy book, when they take this to mean that some people think she's the girlfriend of God the Father, with no irony. They honestly think this. Like, they have no concept of Christian theology, yet somehow they supposedly got this from this location. Proto-Muslims also somehow miss the names of Mary's parents in the very sources they are borrowing from and get them wrong. So, in contrast, what's required for my thesis of telephone game to be true? All that's required is that Muhammad had informants, but Muhammad's sources were almost strictly oral and second-hand or third-hand or fourth-hand or fifth-hand. It's telephone game. Weirdly specific details that appear, they mostly come from hymns, especially since they're usually about popular hymn topics, such as the eschaton and Mary associated with the East in some way. A lack of knowledge of most specifics that is reflected by the fact that these are almost entirely oral retellings. If you tell the plot of the book that you read 10 years ago once, like, tell me the plot of The Bridge to Terabithia. If everybody has read that, I think people are still reading that. So tell me the plot of The Bridge to Terabithia. Like, how many of those details do you remember? Do you remember the kids' names? I don't. Do you remember the details of Terabithia and what they imagined and stuff? I don't. I just remember a few things. And I remember there's a horrible story written by an author who makes money telling fantasy stories, telling a story about how you need to give up on telling fantasy stories to grow up.
That's fine.
But anyway,
I
that aside,
read it, so I couldn't tell you anything about it. But I just want to bring up this comment. I don't want you to address the content in any way. I just want a yes or no answer. And my question is this literally the stupidest comment you have ever seen in your life? Cartona says, the Talmud is a copy of the book of Bukhari. Whoever compares and studies in detail has the same goal. So, stupidest comment you've ever seen in your life, Mary?
That may be close.
All right. And let me take one of these gifting membership events from Jack Ray.
I can't answer this question in a 20-minute interview, nor is it wise to do so, which is why I never brought this topic up myself. You will not find one lecture of mine about this issue. It should never be brought up in public. And I don't like these idiots, and they are idiots, wallahi. This is not something you discuss amongst the masses, ya akhi. It's not wise. I encourage anybody who is really interested to go deep to take the class. I do this class. It'll be 1 year later.
Yeah, Jack, stop being an idiot and discussing gifted memberships to reasoned answers. That's not wise to do.
All right.
Thank you for that. And let me answer this question real quick from Dry Bones. Was that a uterus with a flux capacitor?
Yes,
on
it is.
Indeed, it is. It is the time-traveling uterus.
It is a time-traveling uterus.
Inside joke about how the Islamic narrative
gets chronologies wrong because it's not careful.
Wrong.
And that's chronologies are incredibly too hard to hang on to. Over time, you remember certain details, you forget other details, and things get out of whack. And people who aren't careful readers have a very, very hard time seeing when chronologies are off and wrong. And so whenever I was talking about historians getting chronologies like completely confused, like hundreds of years apart and mixing stuff up, that reminded people of the time traveling uteruses, because chronology is just really hard for people. Geography is just really, really hard for people. It is. So you are going to be in time out for 24 hours. Goodbye, Mahmoud. I don't have time to eat the Quran today because I've still misplaced that stupid book. What's left of it, because I've eaten some of it. And thanks to him, there are bits of the Quran that are sitting festering in my septic tank. And that is where they will spend, and then they will be sucked out and thrown into a sewage treatment plant from there. Just want you guys to know that. So
1.21 gigawatts of Islamophobia.
Working on it. So anyway, for my thesis to be true, no secret knowledge is necessary. No time travel is necessary. No geographical nuttiness is necessary. Literally no elaborate stories of partial deafness where he hears some things and doesn't hear other things, and hears some things and doesn't hear other things. So it's a simple, sensible story. So another thing that they make a big point on is that the Dome of the Rock imitates the Kathisma. It probably doesn't. If it does, it is a cheeky joke that the Christians did, and the Muslims were too ignorant to know that this was a joke that was being pulled on them, that they were having a prank pulled on them. Now, why do I say that? The Dome of the Rock, it was designed by Christians. It was built by Christians to please their Muslim overlords. The Muslims believed that they were rebuilding the temple, the Jewish temple. They did not believe that they were building a mosque. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, which they falsely locate near there, is not the same building as the Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock is meant to be rebuilding the temple. That's what it's for. The Christians didn't know, they didn't care what the original temple looked like. They produced a plan in one of the oldest architectural styles that they knew how to build, and the Muslims, who knew no history, just accepted it. Like, the Christians knew how to build these things. They knew how to build them well. They wouldn't know how to build the architecture of the temple, so they went with the knowledge that they had at the time. And the Muslims want something old looking, and Muslims have no grasp of history, none at all. So you give them something like, this looks old. We have this old thing here. This looks kind of like it. And they accepted it. Since the Muslims thought that the rock in the center was important, because Muslims can't think of any reason to build a sacred building without a rock to fondle, the Christians proposed the style of the martyrium, which has a central element.
Laughing at Mary.
Yes.
Not at a comment. A rock to
for
fondle.
what? Well, I mean, that's what they used to do at the Dome of the Rock, is that they would circle around the rock, they would fondle it, and they would pour oil on it, because they didn't know what else you would do in a temple. They have their own pagan rock, and they come here, and this guy who was a convert to Islam named Harb from Medina, he had a Jewish background and would just lie to them continuously, tell them whatever. They're like, he was like, oh yes, the temple was right here, and they dug in the place and they found a big rock, and they're like, oh, this must be the place of the temple because it has this big rock, and we're rock worshippers, so let's build something around this rock, and it's the Dome of the Rock because rocks are important, right? Because they're stone worshippers, so they're still pagan stone worshippers, just around a different rock. And so if you have a central element, the style of church that was built was called a martyrium, and was circular, had a circular or octagonal element around it, and the outside walls might be made into a square shape instead of the circular octagonal form sometimes. These are all other examples of martyriums that were built in different places. None of those examples are the Kathisma, but were other ones. And these are round, octagonal, and sometimes cruciform. And those were the options for this building style that had a central element, because they were often built on the tomb of a saint. Cruciform was out for obvious reasons. You can't make stuff in the shape of a cross for Muslims. Even the Muslims would have figured that one out. And that left round and octagonal as the options. Now, the following martyrium style churches are shown here. The Golden Octagon of Antioch, that's the first upper one on the left, Cathedral of Basra, and 2 Syrian chapels at the bottom. So, here are some more. Mount Gezerim, Capernaum, San Vitale Ravenna, Saint Simeon the Stylite in Syria, San Lorenzo in Milan, and Saint Haripsme in Armenia are where all of these different ones are from. So they're from all over. They all have the basic martyrium shape, although the exteriors of some are different. They have additional rooms that change the exterior shape, but you see that this was a common early style. The original Holy Sepulchre was also this shape. That's over there on the left. Kathisma is the next one with the green and the highway going past. It was actually discovered because of the widening of the highway. They're like, oh, wait, we need to study this before we stick a highway on top of it. Next, you have Saint Santo Stefano in Rome. And then at the bottom is the Dome of the Rock, which was built after this old style of a martyrium. Because the Dome of the Rock needed no chapels or oratories, it would not be squared off with extra rooms, but would retain the shape of the central dome. So at this point, now we have 2 options. It's either going to be a round building or it's going to be an octagonal building on the outside. If the architects deliberately chose octagonal over round to imitate the Kathisma, it would be to send the secret message that Mary is indeed the Theotokos. So what they would be doing is saying, even though we are building this, hey, we know another church that's built around a stone, not a stone that people worshipped and caressed, but another stone. And it is the church of Mary, the Mother of God. So here we're thumbing our noses at these Muslims by declaring through the form of the building that we're making that Mary is the Mother of God. That's what would have been going on here. Because the Muslims have no cultural knowledge. They have no architectural knowledge. If this is chosen, it was chosen by the Christian architects and builders, and it was chosen to mock Muhammad. Now, the archaeology of the Christian era, from the time of the Christian era, it shows that the Kathisma Church possessed a stone in the center to which the water of a natural spring was directed through pipes and out again. And
this is the proof.
The question is, when did the spring and stone arrive? Were they original to the plan? It is believed that the stone is original and was a rival to the stone in the Holy Sepulchre. But the water absolutely was not. It could not have been. The original roof, it collapsed in the 6th century. It was rebuilt in the middle of the century, being finished before sometime around or before 3 or 538, because after that point, Justinian reformed the money, and it doesn't have the reform money. It has earlier money only. And so this is between the 2 times of the Pilgrim Theodosius and the Piacenza Pilgrim. The floor at this time was also entirely repaved, which is significant. This is probably why the original church was called the Old Kathisma in the life of Theodosius, which is different than the deacon Theodosius's account. I know that's a little bit confusing, but it's probably why the original church was called the Old Kathisma, and a different thing about a different Theodosius that was written. Whether or not the stone was there, that well was there originally. The well was not. The ceramic pipe that took the water from a cistern, so collected rainwater, came in a pipe to this little hollowed out area. It's found only under the second construction layer of the church. That's stratum 3, according to the report of the archaeologist Avner, and it's not under any of the floors that weren't replaced during the restoration. So it seems that the remodel moved the water to either go along with the story of the magic well or magic spring, or is the source of the story of the magic spring. It is most likely the second. If a magic well folktale or magic spring folktale was associated with the flight of Egypt already, that would be a reason for the flight of Egypt to get moved to a geographically impossible place. Whereas the reverse would be ridiculous, that you would invent a well and invent a story, then people would have to accept both of these. The original of the Proto-Evangelium of James was basically forgotten by now, with its detail of Mary dismounting being assigned to that specific place. And this also removes the conflict of the Kathisma and this Kathisma with the Kathisma and the Holy Sepulchre, and associates the place now only with the flight to Egypt, which would allow it to try to get some of the respect that apparently it never actually got that it was trying to get. Because again, remember, when this dome was rebuilt, it was not rebuilt as spectacularly as it was originally. It's lopsided in the rebuilding. People were pinching pennies because this was not the attraction and did not have the respect and attention that the original the woman who was the original patron expected and hoped it would. Now, let's talk about the archaeology of the Muslim era. The Muslims took over many churches, in part or in whole, in the Umayyad era. The Kathisma was not taken over until after 700 AD. So this church that was supposedly central to a chunk of the Quran and super important to early Muslims and formative to early Islam, it was ignored from 637, when the area was conquered, until after 700 AD. That is the entire lifespan of a person who lived into good old age in that era. For an entire lifetime, no Muslim bothered to go, hey, we should take over that church over there because we really care about it. But apparently it was so important that they took it over because it was very, very important to them. But they also didn't bother to do it for more than 63 years.
Yeah, so in addition to not being important to the Muslims, it shows you it wasn't important to the Christians either, because the Muslims want to take over the most important structures to say, you know, we're big and strong, we are dominating the Christians and whatnot. So shows you that how unimportant the site actually was, both to the Christians and to the Muslims.
Yep. In the lifetime of Umar, it does not seem that they really took over much, because he wasn't particularly. I think Umar was super concerned about Muslims potentially imitating Christians. And after Umar, there are the so-called covenants of Umar and various other stories that documented Umar promising to leave Christian churches alone or requiring only parts of churches. Though various people have argued for their authenticity from a strictly historical perspective, these are probably partial or full forgeries. Some are created by Muslims to have a source for Islamic law, while others are made by Christians to stop Muslims from stealing their churches, as Muslims are bandits and steal everything, as any Hindu will agree, because that's exactly what happened to all the Hindu temples. They all got stolen by Muslims, right? And taken over and turned into mosques. This was moderately successful, but of course we still have the stolen Hagia Sophia and other churches that are still under Islamic control, and with the conversions of the Turks will return to Christian control eventually. Now, the Kathisma was almost entirely taken over by Muslims in the Umayyad period, and most of it was remodeled into a mosque. More importantly, the apse and altar were destroyed, with the main area boxed in to make it just another room, and a mihrab, that's a qibla niche facing south, and that was put in a filled-in doorway inside the main part of the church. Okay, so looking over at our picture here at the beginning, that main apse, do you see the wall across it? that was put in by the Muslims. And you see how you can't hold worship services there anymore because now it's just another room. It's not something that people in the main part of the church could stand there and have services there at the altar because that wall, there's a wall there and it's now turned into a room. Furthermore, I said that those additional rooms to the, it's actually to the east, the southeast, were added on later. They were added on to make that no longer the easternmost room, to cancel the apse, to make it so that it's not a proper church anymore. This was done to defile the church so that Christians could not use it for their purposes. Now, look in the south, the Muslim prayer niche at the bottom there to the south. Here's the rock, Muslim prayer niche. Now, it shows a black wall around the rock. That was not a solid wall. It was like a really low wall. So you would look right across it. It was maybe, I don't know how tall it was. Might have been ankle height, might have been knee height. Wasn't taller than that, okay? So it was an ankle height or a knee height wall in a central room that it was still the same room. The reason it was built was because the original columns failed, and that's why the dome fell in. So they built a very low wall that, again, may have been ankle height to connect together the new columns so that there was a strong foundation for the columns and the new dome wouldn't fall in. And that's the point of that. And that was part of that era of Reconstruction. It was the Christian Reconstruction that put in that really low wall. So this big room, the octagonal room, is big and open, and the only thing that's in it, the religious element in it, is that Muslim prayer niche. So, can Christians use this church for worship? No. Why? Because the apse has been walled off, canceled, turned into a regular room, and the entire room has been converted into the prayer room of a mosque. This whole room, the main room, is a mosque prayer room. So Christians can't have services here. So yeah, it might be a 1-inch high wall. It goes underground. It's got the wall is dug down underground, and its main purpose is to support the columns coming up and connect them all together so that one column doesn't sink a bunch and then the dome fall in. So the point of the wall is not to be like a wall dividing anything visible. It's just to support the columns, and it was knee high or lower. It was a very, very low wall that was there for structural reasons. But again, that would be kind of a weird, unattractive element in the middle of the church. And it shows that even when this was rebuilt, it did not have the prestige that they'd hoped that it had. They didn't do another solution. They did the easy solution to the whole dome falling in problem and built this foundation, low, deep foundation wall for the new columns, the replacement columns, because the previous one failed, and they're like, well, this will definitely hold, and it did work. But it shows that they were willing to sacrifice the usability and aesthetics of the place because it wasn't as important as they hoped that it would be.
Before
now,
you go on, let me take one
yes.
of these I was going to say super chat, but gifted membership events. Once again, from Jack Ray, this time 5 memberships.
Apple. You ate the apple. The whole apple. Yes, the whole apple. You ate it. But a small seed, you left it. You put it back into the earth. What happened? Allah, through His power, caused that to grow and to give you how many apples? Thousands.
Thousands of apples coming your way, Jack. For every gifted membership, you get 1,000 apples, I think. I'm not quite sure how the math works out. Maybe it's for every set of seeds in an apple, you get thousands of apples. And I don't know how many seeds are in an apple, but I think it's around 10 or so. So maybe it's only 100 per gifted membership. we need to ask the Mufti to answer that important question, because I just don't know. I'm not that well versed on how Apple math works. Sorry.
All right. So, again, I want to emphasize that no Christian service could take place anymore in this space. This was not a site where Muslims took over a peripheral part of the complex and left the church alone for Christian worship. They took over the central part of the church for Muslim prayers. They destroyed the altar to prevent Christian worship. The destruction of the altar is important because the scholars who want to pretend that early Islam wasn't a repressive and abusive system want to pretend that when Muslims stole a church, they were actually worshiping alongside Christians. And that's what Shoemaker and Dye and Avner are trying to propose. Now,
So they
Chalcedonian,
take the propaganda that claims there's side-by-side worship,
yeah,
and then
and
they use
it's just
that
not.
as evidence that this must have been a
They're
source
saying,
of Islam.
but they're just saying that there must have been side by side worship. Based on what? Where's the side by side worship? And I will show you the only evidence of continued Christian occupation, and it's not in the old church. So you cannot say that they were using the old church whenever the only evidence we have is Muslim use of the old church, and we have clear evidence that Christians were now being moved out and bumped out to a much, much smaller and more humble area, and then say that, oh, they were worshiping side by side. It's untrue. The Chalcedonian and Oriental Orthodox and would not even willingly share space with the Assyrian Church of the East Christians at this time, even though there wasn't a hardline or a true schism yet between the Chalcedonians and the Oriental Orthodox. These sticklers for Orthodox purity were not rubbing elbows with people who merely had a very finely different Christological view, much less people who denied the divinity of Jesus just because they claimed to honor Mary while saying that she had birth agonies. The honor Mary was due, according to the Chalcedonians and the Oriental Orthodox, was as the mother of God. You can't separate it into, oh, they thought Mary was a virgin, so that's good enough. No, mother of God. That's important.
So before you go on, I do have to answer this very important question from Church in Morocco. I have an apple in front of me. What should I do with it now? The answer is you should eat the apple, all of the apple, but you should save the seeds and put them in the ground, and then you'll get many, many more apples, thousands, in fact. That is what I have learned from the amazing theology of Mufti Menk. So,
all right. So here is the great phenomenal evidence for continued Christian occupation. It's this medallion right here. Can you make out the cross in the medallion, Thaddeus?
I mean, not at this size, I can't.
You can actually see it. I can see it on your screen from where I am. It's really subtle. At the top.
Is it between the two people?
Well, between the thing that looks like the X and I'm not sure what that other letter is, but that little brown reddish thing, that is a cross. There you go. That's the cross. So that's.
I think I can probably tell where it is. I'd have to
Yeah,
be
it's
looking
really
at a larger
fine
image because it's not that big on my screen, but I think I can tell what you're talking about. And yeah, that's.
Does this look like something made by people who are openly and freely and unabashedly practicing Christianity with the kind of treatment that the cross normally receives? This teeny tiny one tiny piece of mosaic by one tiny piece of mosaic cross. Yeah. So the only evidence of continuing Christian activity into the Umayyad period is a medallion that indicates that the attached monastery remained active for a while, which was often the case in churches seized by Muslims. In room 25, there was a medallion that probably says of Abba, that means abbot, Basiliscos, that's probably the name, by the provision and effort of John the Recluse. This is probably a commemorative medallion for the building of the room, because the Umayyad period coincided with the destruction or with the construction of a new courtyard with 6 or 7 rooms around it to the south. The Muslims appear to have seized everything that had already been built, but permitted the monks to build a new space nearby. Much is made that there's a cross, but note how subtly the cross is included. Most of you guys on stream, if you have a phone, you're not going to be able to see this cross. It's so tiny. It is at the top, and kind of in between the U-shaped black letters up there. There's a tiny, tiny cross. It is made so that it almost blends into the background, and it is very small. It is not in the old church building, but it's misrepresented by many people, by Shoemaker and Avner, who darn well knows where it is because she's the one who uncovered it, and Dye both act like it's in the main church building and use this as evidence that the main room of the church, which was the room converted to the mosque, like that is the prayer room, that Christians were somehow using that. Makes no sense. It is possible that this was a new Kathisma Church for the Christians, though no new architecture was permitted to indicate the presence of an altar until the which may have been in use until the entire thing was abandoned in the 10th century. The monks were not allowed to have any Christian architecture or imagery here, but this room may have been where they put in the new altar, and the courtyard may have been where people gathered for the 2 Kathisma feasts that were being celebrated at that time, which were the 2 dedications, the first dedication and then the second of the rebuilding. If not, then the feasts were just kept on the calendar out of stubbornness, which is also possible. It may have just been that they were still on the, even though they couldn't celebrate it, they kept the feasts on the calendar because they're not going to take them out just because the Muslims stole the church. So yeah, I mean, it is kind of a lopsided cross too, because it's being very, very subtle. Now, there are a whole bunch of false statements about the church in Avner's work. She writes, the fact that the entrances to the chapels from the ambulatory were not canceled.
Sorry, Mary, real quick. If you could go back to that screen there. Let me try something real quick here and make it bigger for people to see.
Let's see if I'm pointing to the cross with my mouse, but I don't know whether or not they can see it. You can stick a circle around it or something.
Yeah.
You can at least see my. Can other people actually see my? Let's see whether or not other people can see.
No, other people can't see your mouse.
It's weird because sometimes my mouse shows up and sometimes it doesn't. It's just, however they modify the software.
Right.
So if you can, it's right underneath the top of the wreath, right in the center, just below that. It looks pretty much like a blank space on, and this is not a huge medallion either. So if you aren't looking for it, you wouldn't notice it.
Let's see, did that actually make it? No, that only made it bigger for me. I was trying to make it bigger for the audience, but it only actually made it bigger for me.
But you did have something that you could write with before.
Yeah. I mean, I can circle it.
Yeah, just circle it really quickly. They're on a circle there.
Yeah, so give me 1 second. I actually hadn't started it up, but I can do that.
Oh, so my mouse apparently appears occasionally. Well, let me try here. Oh, look, it is there. It's there. It's showing up. I don't know why it's showing up. Look at that.
Oh, yeah. Now it's there.
I got it out. Now it's gone.
But, okay. Just give me 1 second here.
Ah, my mouse is back. See, it shows up randomly. Ah, now it's gone.
Properties.
Yeah, like that. Here you go. That's the incredible evidence of continued Christian usage.
It's very small.
There. Okay. It's very small in the center of that, but I pointed to a bunch of times now. It has actually shown up, so it should work. All right. So one way or another, they should get it at some point. Okay. So Moving on, the fact that the entrances to the chapels from the ambulatory were not canceled, this is what Avner says, and that the inscription, possibly dating to the 8th century CE, decorated with a cross, was found at the site, demonstrates that Christian religious activity did not cease with the Muslim conquest. From the 8th century CE onward, the southeastern and southern areas of the church served the Muslims for prayers, while Christian activities continued in the rest of the church. So she's trying to claim that only this little corner over here, that has Muslim prayer niche, between that and like the really low wall, that was where the Muslims were, and down into these other lower rooms, basically. And all the rest, the Christians were using that. Now, keep in mind that the Christian area was actually to the south of the supposed Islamic area. So I don't know why she's wildly claiming that the northern areas and the central area were available Christians. She's just making it up. She's like, she pulled it out of her butt. She's making it up. It's nonsense.
All right, while Mary is having a coughing fit, let's pull up a gifting membership event. This one, plot twist, not by Jack Ray, but by Misonatic.
And Allah will bless you in a million ways. You find the tree will grow and you will have lots and lots of wealth. This is the example that we gave to the children. And I'm letting you know that when you sow that seed by giving, you shall receive much more than you gave by the will of Allah. Give as much as you can, for indeed you will reap much more than you have sown.
So you gifted 10 memberships and you'll reap much more than you said. So I guess you're going to get 20 memberships back in return for that. He said, let's get some green in the chat, and indeed lots of green. Majority of the people who are watching are now members.
Although it'd be hilarious if Cartona became a member. our new Muslim troll. All right, so again, guys, the altar was destroyed. The apse was destroyed. Thus, there were no Christian services in the main part of the church, which she falsely claimed, it demonstrates that the Christian activity continued in the rest of the church. Utter nonsense. Room 25, which is to the south of all of this, it's the only room that shows any evidence of Christian activity. And it's not in the main building at all, but to a room accessed from a new courtyard to the south and appears to be a replacement monastery. The main Mihrab was in the main octagonal room. Thus, the main room was a mosque, from which there is the ambulatory, which is just an area of the main room. And that is how what used to be chapels were accessed, from the main room that is now a mosque. Yes, there was this continuous low column foundation since the renovation after the initial collapse, and that's to connect the columns to keep them from sinking too low so that it doesn't collapse again. It didn't close off the room. It's still one room, and that one room is a mosque. Avner even admits this herself a few sentences later. Another significant archaeological change in this stratum was the construction on the eastern side of the church of a building that canceled the main apse. This Umayyad building was dated by a coin, blah, 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 blah. This change attests to the cessation of Christian worship in the holiest part of the church. And then she goes, except for the central rock. Based on what, woman? Based on what? There is no warrant for her parentheses. She pulled it out of her butt. I want it to be true, so it's true. I'm just going to say this. There's no evidence for this. The central rock is in the mosque room. Dye also loves to make, Dye's great with false statements. So he says the size and structure of the building showed that it was an important place of pilgrimage. No, the size and structure show that Iklia, the person who was the patroness, she was rich, she wanted to put on a show, and she wanted it to be an important place of pilgrimage, and probably meant for it to house relics on all of those side chapels. which it probably never did. It is rarely mentioned in the sources and is not mentioned by at least one pilgrim who made a detailed travelogue who walked right past it. Did not bother to mention that it was there. Plenty of would-be pilgrimage sites were massively overbuilt and some were scaled down later. This one had no provision for overnight guests, so it didn't need to be scaled down in the same way, but the dome itself was scaled down after collapse, indicating that it wasn't as popular as hoped, and so it wasn't worth building to its original magnificence. And keep in mind that just because you didn't close off all those side chapels doesn't mean that they're chapels anymore. They could be storage for animal feed for all we know. There's no evidence that they were still being used as chapels just because all of the doors weren't closed in, bricked in. Does not mean that they're still chapels. Dye also says the central octagon is delimited by 2 rings of columns. The pilgrims were traveling between them in their prayers or processions. So Dye just makes the statement that transforms a Christian ambulatory into a pagan Muslim circling ritual site because he pulled it out of his butt. The ambulatory on the outside of churches served to support the central dome. That was its main purpose. And sometimes for people to reach the smaller chapels and rooms on the periphery of the main room. It was never for circling around something. You have ambulatories in all these buildings. People are not circling things in them. They're not pagan Muslims. You can see the Cathedral of Basra, which is above, which has the same plan. That is what it is used for. It is extremely, extremely dishonest because it tries to make pagan Muslim traditions to have a non-existent parallel in Christianity. That this church was particularly and uniquely unsuitable for circling among all martyriums because the raised apse and the altar, with the altar, these were both raised into and moved into the ambulatory. So you have over here on the bottom picture, you have that big red block. That is where the altar used to be. And that huge room that's sticking out and touching essentially the central dome low wall thing, that is part of the apse. And it was raised up off of the ground and it was built out into this central area in the rebuilding. And so and those 2 side walls went all the way out and interrupted the ambulatory. So it is physically impossible to make a circle around the rock using the ambulatory, as Dye claims that people were, unless you possess the ability to teleport through walls. So Dye is asserting that that Christians had teleportation abilities now. This is the level that we have reached. To force Christians into a pagan Muslim model, to try to create a parallel that does not exist, Dye asserts that Christians were teleporting to be able to do pagan circling rituals in the ambulatory. So anyway, the raised base of the columns, the stylobate, did make a very continuous low wall, but again, that would just make it harder to circle around since walls cut across it all the way to the edge. So you'd have, okay, fine, you only go through the ambulatory part of the time. Now you're hopping over that low wall to continue your circle twice. Walk around the ambulatory, get to the wall, hop over the wall, cross across the front, hop back over the wall, go around the ambulatory again. I mean, it's ridiculous. He just made stuff up. That is Dye pulling stuff out of his backside. And it's comments like this that get people like Rob, because Dye says it so confidently. The pilgrims were traveling between them in their prayers or processions. He just makes it up. And, somebody like Rob is like, oh, this guy must actually have some reason for believing that. No, he's making it up. He's pulling it out of his butt. So now let's talk about the Umayyad Mihrab or Mihrabs, because Avner claims that there are multiple Mihrabs and she just makes it up. Which is, So frustrating to have people just invent things because they like the sound of it. So this church, it was renovated to convert it into a mosque. It removed whatever had been previously on the floors at the time, like whatever kind of patterns, mosaic patterns, and it removed the floors in a number of other rooms too. Room 1, which is the room to the south of the apse, it has no mihrab. But Avner speculates that there would have been one just painted on the wall because the room has a fancy floor. So Avner says there's another mihrab here because the floor is really fancy. As if there would be no other reason for a room to have a fancy floor except that it was a mosque prayer room. Mosques do not have multiple prayer rooms, generally speaking. This would be a really, really exceedingly unusual feature for there to be multiple prayer rooms, much less multiple simultaneous prayer rooms with with mihrabs facing different directions. As far as I know, this would be completely unique in the history of Islamic architecture. And she's just saying, yeah, it probably had one on the wall because the floor is fancy. The orientation of the flooring faces southeast, which is the most Meccan direction that room even has, because it was built against an existing wall. I believe Avner is also proposing that there was a painted mihrab in the fan-shaped room. And so the first one, room 1, is, if you remember, the apse is the one that kind of sticks out here over to the right, and then the southeast facing room is the one directly below this apse sticky outy room. It's the new square room down there. And she says that she claims that because the orientation of the flooring would make the room facing southeast, then there must have been mihrab there. Now there's this fan-shaped room along the bottom, along that south wall there, that southern one. You should be able to see that little fan-shaped room right around the ambulatory, right outside of it. She claims that this was also a room with a mihrab, and I believe that she's proposing that it had a painted mihrab because it doesn't have an architectural one, but she claims that it has a mihrab. So what it's going to be?
Sorry, which direction are you talking about? Because you said fan shaped, but I don't really know what that means.
So the
I know what a fan looks like, but.
So do you see the fan-shaped room? If you go the southern room that's square on the map there, look to its immediate right. Do you see it? It's a wedge of pie, kind of.
Yeah, so a triangle, yeah.
Yeah, the triangle, but with a curved end. That is it. That little triangular room down there in the south. That's the second one. This is the room with the date palm flooring. She says that room 54 could have a southeastern direction of prayer just because of the orientation of the flooring. There is a mosaic floor in an unnumbered room called L54, and regular room numbering stops at 25. So I'm conjecturing that this is what she means, and given how much emphasis she puts on this date palm flooring later, I believe she means the same room. It couldn't mean anything else as far as I can tell, and everybody else who reacts to it appears to have the same interpretation that I do. So she also speculates that the orientations of other random Umayyad rooms of the era indicate other differing directions of prayer, such as toward Jerusalem, and all of this is very bizarre. So the point of this, the point of of the rooms facing or not facing different directions, is that she is arguing that there are other rooms from which we ought to draw theological significance from the patterns on the floor, because they're really fancy rooms. That means that they're rooms of prayer, and the directions of the flooring tell us the direction of prayer, and these directions of prayer are not exactly the same as the southernmost one, which is the closest to the correct Qibla, but instead are two slightly different directions, and therefore these are reminders of vestiges of the tradition of Mary fleeing because there are random other directions of prayer. And I will, in a moment, explain what her reasoning is. It is just as insane as it sounds. So, Avner begins by invoking Bashir to support the idea that the Muslim Qibla was once eastward. And this is Suleiman Bashir's article, Qibla Musharika, an early Muslim prayer in churches. Now, the best evidences, and I put this in quotes because they're terrible, of Bashir were references to calling the Musalla for prayer on Eid Musharak, or the place of making dawn, as Sharik means sunrise place, thus east. A Musalla is a place for prayer that isn't a mosque. And the Eid prayer is a dawn prayer. So the Eid place for making prayer that is not a mosque is uniquely called the place of making dawn. It's even explained in Muslim sources that a place where people gather for Eid prayer has this name for this reason. And Bashir admits this. You don't get an Eastern Qibla from a prayer at dawn just on Eid. It has nothing to do with the direction anybody's facing. It's just about a dawn prayer. And he's trying to make, because the word for dawn is etymologically similar to the word for or etymologically linked to the word for east, he's trying to say that somehow they're facing east, even though there's no implication of that anywhere in the sources. Like, this is like a remnant of a previous tradition of facing east because Christians faced east when they prayed. He also, here's his other big evidence. He notes that the Masjid al-Khaif at Mina, Khaif at Mina, it's called Eastern. But that's because it is. It's east of Mecca, and it's the easternmost Hajj mosque. Why would it indicate a Qibla whenever it's called Eastern? Because it's in the east. Like, it makes no sense. That some Muslims occasionally prayed in churches was also something that he claimed meant that they prayed eastward, but there's no reason to believe that. Invoking an east-facing Qibla in Egypt also does no good because plenty of North African Qiblas were eastward to face Mecca. Now,
Yeah.
Muslims, they originally wanted to take over many churches and turn them into mosques. That's why they prayed in some, or to start shouldering in. Once a mosque, no Christian would be allowed to pray to the triune God there or even enter it. It was a power move. Christians successfully convinced Muslims to stay out of most of their spaces. The fact that they invaded them in the first place meant only that Muslims sought to usurp Christian locations as if they were their own and related to their own heritage, as Muhammad himself falsely claimed. Next, Avner notes that the Islamic sources say that Muslims used to pray in a different directions. Yes, toward Jerusalem for all of less than 16 to 17 months. Islam had no Qibla at all for 11 or more years. Then it had a Qibla toward Jerusalem to suck up for the Jews to less than 2 years. Then it had a Qibla toward Mecca for the 10 years after the Jews slapped Muhammad down and rejected him. But she asserts that this shows in early Islam there was uncertainty regarding the direction of prayer. That's a stupid interpretation. You do not get that from any of the early sources or any of the sources of any time. You do not get uncertainty. Like uncertainty of where to physically put yourself, yes, but uncertainty as to which direction should you face. Should you be facing Mecca or somewhere else? No uncertainty. Again, chronological, one event after another. It matters. The only mihrab of Kathisma is to the south, but Avner needs to make other possible mihrabs with different qiblas to try to connect the church to supposed Islamic Marian devotions. And she does this by simply asserting that the floors of pattern direction she finds might be Marian in direction are secret indications of additional mihrabs, 2 in the southeast and 1 fancy corner decoration in the northeast, even though the flooring doesn't even align in that direction, which is her excuse for the other rooms. So she goes, the flooring aligns in this way, therefore there must be a mihrab for 2 of the rooms, and another room the flooring doesn't align in that direction, but there happens to be a fancy medallion in one corner of the room, so that fancy medallion must be a direction of prayer too. So she doesn't even use the same standards across her different rooms. And she has no reasons for any of these standards. From the northeast
You're
fancy
wrong,
decoration.
Mary. She has the all-important standard of it fits my hypothesis.
Yeah, from the northeast fancy direction, she posits a mihrab facing Jerusalem because that's where Mary grew up in the Islamic and folk Christian tradition. And from the southeast, she gets a mihrab related to the southeastern corner of the Temple Mount in the Islamic tradition, a sign that assigned the room where Mary grew up and also received the Annunciation, which is called Mihrab al-Maryam. Mihrab in the Quran actually means a holy sanctuary, but because this is embarrassing, since the Quran thinks Mary was actually hanging out in the Holy of Holies, it quickly got reinterpreted to a room of prayer and then later to an indicator of Qibla. So that's why it's called Mihrab al-Maryam, because it's called that in the Quran when it's actually referring to the Holy of Holies. But then you have to do a cover-up reinterpretation. So she says that Muslims were praying toward the northeast to pray toward Jerusalem, even though Jerusalem's closer to the due north, but whatever. Northeast to pray toward Jerusalem because Mary grew up there, so then Muslims are going to pray in that direction because this is a special Marian church. That does not hold any water. Remember, there is no actual mihrab here. She's just saying there's a fancy decoration that means that that's where they prayed. And then she says they also prayed to the southeast because, again, on the Temple Mount, there is a ruins of a place on the southeast that Muslims, early Muslims of the Caliphate, decided was the room that Mary had. And so to mimic that, they're facing southeast, even though it's literally located to the north. So they're facing their butts toward the literal thing and then just turning southeast because Mary was on the southeast of the Temple Mount and praying in that direction. What are they praying toward? You're facing something. What are they facing just in the general direction of the orientation of Mary's room on the Temple Mount? That is her argument, and it makes so much just complete lack of sense. There's no sense in this whatsoever. It's just incoherent whenever you actually slow down and find out what she's arguing. What's worse is that Islamic tradition had no consensus on where Jesus was actually born. Some sources say that he was born on the Temple Mount, and so they say that the eastern room was just where Mary had withdrawn to, even though that makes no sense because you need to have palm trees for Mary's birth, but somehow it's still in this interior room that magically grew palm trees, I guess. And then others copy the Christian tradition, say that it's Bethlehem. And the issue is that the Quran says that Mary withdrew to an eastern place. Since Bethlehem is to the south of Jerusalem, it should disqualify it. That same room on the Temple Mount, it's the candidate because at least it's to the east. So that's why Islam doesn't officially have an answer. Maybe this, maybe that. We're not going to say because none of it actually fits with what the Quran says. It's not conceivably reasonable in context that withdrawing from her people or would be just moving to a room in the same building to the southeast. But it's still better than the embarrassment of having a birthplace that's due south whenever she's supposed to be withdrawing to the east. So now, Abner supposes then that the asserted southeastern mihrabs are because Mary's room was in the southeast of the Temple Mount, even though that would have the worshippers praying with their butts facing closest to the room rather than towards it, and that's just a wild speculation. Note that there is no Islamic or Christian tradition of Jesus being born at Kathisma. So this whole thing is supposed to be that Jesus was born at Kathisma according to this tradition, and this tradition really influenced the Muslims who correctly remembered this ancient tradition that this palm story was associated with birth. If they remembered that, then they would have had him born at Kathisma. That tradition doesn't exist in the Muslim sources. There is no Muslim tradition of Jesus being born at Kathisma. Not even a whisper of it. Why? Because it was never a Muslim tradition. It was never a Christian tradition. No one ever, at any time, ever believed this. And so
Oh,
this nullifies their
so
entire point.
Mary, I mean that's just so horrible because this is the proof that they have the same beliefs. But you're saying neither one believed it, so they do
Neither
have the
one.
same belief.
But if Avner's correct, then they care about this place because Jesus was actually born there. If Dye's correct, if Shoemaker correct, Jesus was born there according to the early Christian traditions and the early Muslim traditions. That this is supposed to be the tradition that makes Kathisma important. So Jesus needs to be born on that rock, according to Muslims, for the idea of what Avner and Shoemaker and Dye think is this occultic Christian tradition of Jesus's birth with palms and so on, actually having a Christian source. The Christians need to have spread this idea to the Muslims, and the Muslims need to have believed it. But they don't. They don't know where Jesus was born because they can't accept Jesus being born to the south because she's supposed to withdraw to the east. And they have no tradition of their own that makes any sense. They don't have the tradition that is central to the thesis of Shoemaker, Dye, and Avner. So, why is the Kathisma important to the Muslims if Muslims think that Jesus is born in Jerusalem or potentially in Bethlehem, but mainly in Jerusalem? Because the entire thesis of Shoemaker and Avner and Dye is that Kathisma is a parturition type of shrine. Yet we have no birth taking place here in the Islamic tradition. But this is why it's supposed to be important to these Muslims. Why don't they believe the central thing that's supposed to be important about this church? Why don't they have any hint of it? Even to say, no, we don't believe that. We've heard this, but we don't believe that. Plenty of sources record, we've heard this and don't believe that. Now, next question is, do palms indicate a connection to Marian devotions? The Umayyad remodel of the Kathisma was inspired by the Dome of the Rock. It echoed many of the patterns there. Even Avner says this. Shoemaker seems confused and thinks that because the Dome of Rock was built after the Kathisma, the mosaics of the Kathisma were also first, but they weren't. Because remember, Kathisma was built, Dome fell in, rebuilt, conquest, then the Dome of the Rock built, then Kathisma taken over and all of the mosaics redone, imitating the Dome of the Rock. Some of the few naturalistic decorations in the Dome of the Rock are palm trees, which are interpreted to indicate promises of Jannah in the Islamic tradition. Most of these are abstract, so that one to the bottom left, the only truly bottom one, the bottom picture, on the left, that is an abstract palm tree. It doesn't look very naturalistic at all. But there's one naturalistic image of palm trees, and it even has 3 palm trees together, which is the same as in the Kathisma remodel. So in the top picture is the Kathisma remodel. It has one very large palm tree with lots of fruit, and then it has 2 small palm trees, also both with fruit. Now, the one in the Dome of the Rock has a large palm tree with fruit and 2 small palm trees without any fruit. Now, palms are not unique to either Kathisma or to the Dome of the Rock in Islamic architecture. Neither are triple trees. This is at the Damascus Mosque, which was stolen from Christians in 715 and redecorated. This particular part dates from 789. So if you look on either side of the triple doors, you will see one big tree and 2 little bitty trees. They're kind of hard to see, but you have triple trees there. They're naturalistic. And then on another part of it, you have a palm tree that has fruit. Not 3, but 1. But I mean, come on, there 3 trees, palm trees. These are details that you see elsewhere. They're not super, super unique. Now, the floor supposed slam dunk is the mosaic of the 3 palm trees from the era of the Islamic occupation of the site, being a big one with 2 smaller ones. Avner argues that this composition is rare, yet it is found in the Dome of the Rock, which this is recognized to be imitating. So the significance of this has to belong to the Dome of the Rock if it belongs to anything. If this is super special for some reason, it was super special, it was made in the Dome of the Rock, not when it's just copied here. Yet, according to Avner, this is supposed to be a sophisticated representation of the palm in the center and Mary and Jesus on either side, referencing the Islamic story of a date palm feeding Mary as she labored. If this is the representation, why would Jesus even be there? Jesus isn't born yet in the story of the
What?
feeding.
I'm sorry, Mary. I got to stop you. What? It's just a palm tree.
Yeah, well, she says that since you're not allowed to draw figures, that this is a symbolic representation.
So
What?
she concludes, based on what's not there,
Yes.
what the image means.
Yes. And remember,
am I misunderstanding something, or
no? Furthermore, in Muslim art, especially at this stage, it is not into illusion, symbolism, or subtlety. These are extremely unsophisticated and literal people commissioning art. Muhammad passionately hated subtlety and undeclared metaphor. Why would his followers suddenly go crazy for these things? And remember, it's imitating something else.
If it was bending or something,
what?
Maybe, like if the palm tree is bending or something, I could say maybe.
Well, remember that it doesn't bend; it just gets shaken in the Islamic one. But still, like it makes sense.
Okay, if it was shaking, right, you could represent that.
Or it has fallen fruit or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a freaking palm tree. There's nothing special about it.
And it's known to be a copy of the palm tree that was already at the Dome of the Rock. It is a copy of something else, so the significance is there. So, even so, Avner cites exactly one representation of Mary and Joseph on the road to Bethlehem and a 6th century ivory produced in Syria that happens to have a palm in the background to declare that the nativity in Christian tradition was iconographically linked to palms. Here's another similar ivory from the same time period. Look at all those pots in this image. Can I use it to claim that the nativity is iconographically linked to pots because there happen to be some pots in this image? Like, this is the level that she sunk to. Yeah, there's probably going to be a palm tree in the image of Mary and Joseph traveling in the outdoors to Bethlehem if there are images of the flora of the area. If you have background images, what else is it going to be other than palm tree?
Okay, so this is the image, right, that she's referencing, right?
No, this is another image. I could not.
Okay, I can't see a palm tree anywhere. So it's so small.
I would have had to pay like $30 to, but there's only one. There are many, many, many. So this is Avner, who is the archaeologist who was the lead archaeologist in the excavation of Kathisma, is saying this nonsense. So there are many of these Christian carved ivories that have different patterns that link to. Sorry, one second.
So I'm going to address this real quick from Daughter of the Most High. Who is that on the screen, and why did he get horns? So that's an image of Yusuf Estes. It's related to a stream I did a long time ago about Dul Qarnayn, Alexander the Great, and Yusuf Estes' claim that he founded the Catholic Church in Rome, which he never went to. 600 years before, or 300 years before Jesus was born. So since we're having a stream on the subject of Dul Qarnayn, and he has the hilarious statement about what Alexander did, he gets the Dul Qarnayn animation.
Yeah, well, I thought that, yeah. So these were kind of, it was something small and valuable that you could take home from your pilgrimage. And so there were a lot of these carved ivories that had various scenes of events in the Holy Land. And so I pulled up a bunch. They have tons of different, there are many different ones. These are not like standardized scenes. It's just whatever the artist happened to carve in the way he happened to carve it. So one ivory from many, many ivories happens to have a palm on it, and she declares that this is an iconographical link of the nativity because it shows Mary and Joseph traveling with a palm. Now here's a picture of Mary having given birth to Christ, baby's in the manger, and there are pots around here. So using her logic, pots are iconographically linked to the birth of Christ. Like, it makes no sense to make the arguments that she does. She is truly desperately
Okay.
casting around to make these silly arguments.
So what? Sorry.
Yeah.
So are you saying that by the same logic?
Yes, by the same logic.
Okay, okay.
Her logic is that if something is represented with the figures, then it's an iconographical link. This one has not just one pot, but multiple pots. There are
And it's
at
got
least 2
buildings.
pots
I
here.
mean,
Maybe. No, they're little pots. There's a pot next to her by her elbow, and then there's
oh,
a pot
it
hanging
also has
from that.
buildings, right?
Yeah,
It's
it
got
has buildings.
in the
Buildings are
background, and
iconographically or linked to the nativity. Look,
and there's
there is
what is that?
goat.
What is?
Goats are iconographically linked. I think that's
Uh-huh,
goat.
uh-huh.
So it's all a fireplace type of thing,
Yep.
looking thing. That might be what it is. I can't tell what it looks like. It looks like a bread oven. That's iconographically linked to the nativity using her logic. She just put a random background decoration on one of many, many, many ivories and declared that that's proof of an iconographical link. That's nonsense. So Abner even believes.
But this picture doesn't have Jesus in it, so therefore.
Oh, it does have Jesus in it. He's right there.
No, the palm one, the new one on the screen. But this picture doesn't have Jesus in it, so it's a second graphical link. Every palm everywhere is a proof that it's linked to Jesus because you don't know Jesus.
Much, right? So Abner even believes it to be even more likely to represent Christ's cross next to out of the 2 thieves. So she goes to all these arguments about how it's about the nativity, and then she goes, oh, but I think it's more likely to represent Christ's cross next to 2 thieves because the cross equals the tree of life. Iconography was already known. Sometimes either the 2 thief crosses or Christ's cross had been replaced in other churches in this way. So you would find another church that would have Christ's cross as a cross in the center and then 2 trees on the side to tie together the idea of tree of life and the cross by poetically having the thieves' trees become trees, or thieves' crosses become trees. And the reverse would happen, where the central cross would become a tree of life and the 2 side crosses would remain crosses for that same purpose. But no matter what, it's still that this particular image is a copy of the Dome of the Rock. Now, she might have a point. The 3 trees on the Dome of the Rock, they might actually really be a sly thumbing of the nose by a Christian artist against the Muslim overlords, a message that Christ is king no matter what they claim. If this represents crosses, there's no possible way it was encoded by Muslims. It also doesn't relate to Mary then. So why'd she make all this effort to make an argument about Mary whenever she doesn't even think it's the most likely thing? It could be that the Muslim rulers in the remodel of the Kathisma specified the inclusion of the palm specifically among the Dome of the Rock decorations because it does relate to the Mary in the Quranic account, because it was a Christian church related to Mary, but at that point the nativity was not any longer in any way related to the Christian tradition of the Kathisma, much less the Muslim tradition of the Kathisma. It's just Mary reminds us of palms because that's the only thing we know about Mary as Muslims, so we're gonna put that in. Yeah, she does seem to be smoking pot. It's pretty ridiculous.
And the proof is that there's an icon with a pot in it.
And then this fancy corner is supposed to indicate that there's a mihrab in this direction.
What?
Yeah, because it's fancy. It's a very fancy corner, and so clearly they must have been praying this corner. This harmonic shield pattern there, which is the kind of vegetal type of thing looking going there, it was a pre-existing pre-Christian pattern that appeared in some Christian and Jewish places of worship, and it's usually considered to represent the dome of heaven over the full extent of earth. And it was repeated here perhaps to evoke the same idea. It wasn't a specifically religious image, it was just about the universe. It was a symbol meaning the universe. Avner identifies cornucopias in the corners, but this is a weird identification to me because they just look like acanthus leaves and decorative
What?
grapes. So I don't know. Whatever.
What? Where's the
Um,
cornucopia?
I'm not really sure. It's confused. It's confused me. So
Yeah. I
the
mean,
harmonic shield, I think,
I
is the
see.
lower
There's
bit.
that.
And
Yeah,
the
that thing
vegetable
you're calling a shield,
yeah.
and then I see a bunch of grapes. I don't see
Yeah.
anything else.
So anyway, I'm baffled by Abner's attempts to make the harmonic shield somehow particularly significant to the location of the church. She doesn't even articulate an argument here. She just appeals to what she evaluates as a fancier corner and decoration, the approximate direction of Jerusalem, as covertly hinting at a hidden mihrab or las mihrab. But like, she doesn't even make an argument why a harmonic shield would be significant of anything. Here's the one that I was telling you to remember earlier. Remember whenever we talked about if Mary is the case containing a pearl, she is not the pearl. If she is the mother of pearl, she is not the pearl. If she is the shell, she is not the pearl because the pearl is Jesus. Do you remember that conversation we had
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
couple
Yeah.
weeks
I
ago?
remember.
Yeah. So Abner thinks that these pearls in fabric imitating mosaic are indications of Marian associations. So
Okay. Well, first of all, are we actually sure these are pearls? Because they could just be
we
circles.
do actually know that they are pearls because this is a well-established mosaic that is an imitation of extremely expensive pearl embroidered brocade fabric that was produced by both the Byzantines and the Sassanian Persians. That is, there is a pattern used in other places that looks very luxurious and pretty. It has vegetal elements that might vaguely evoke images of paradise, and it is copied, and it was copied before the Islamic era, and it's copied here in mosaic form to imitate this very luxurious fabric. So they are pearls on fabric that are now being imitated in mosaic.
Okay.
But why would they
But
suddenly represent Mary? Because
yeah,
this
that
is
was
an
to
existing
represent
pattern that
Jesus.
exists in a whole bunch of other places.
Right.
So
Right.
she correctly says that Mary is compared to mother of pearl in various
Yeah.
Christian writings.
Mother.
Mother of pearl. And then she even correctly says that she's represented by shells in some art. Then she jumps to Mary being represented by actual pearls, and that argument is just plain stupid. Mary is mother of pearl or a shell because she grew the pearl of great price inside of her, Jesus. If Mary is the mother of pearl, she can't possibly be the pearl. So she just blew up her own
Do you
metaphor.
think? Yeah. Do you think that she doesn't understand what
No,
mother of
she
pearl
doesn't.
means?
She clearly does not understand.
She doesn't know that the physical object mother of pearl is things taken from clamshells.
She understands that Mary is a shell. She just thinks that shells are associated with pearls, so you can just freely
So you can
associate
just say the two are the
But she
same.
doesn't understand why. She
yeah.
doesn't understand that Jesus is that the gospel is the pearl of great price. Therefore,
Right.
Jesus
I mean,
is the pearl of
the
great price.
mother of pearl phrase. I mean, that should kind of give it away, right?
I
If she's the
know.
mother of the pearl, does that mean she's the pearl? I mean, come on.
If there is any Christian meaning to the pearl-like circles being used to decorate the edges of a medallion, and I believe that it would be stretching it really, really far to assert that this is so, it would represent Christ, or really a bunch of Christs, which is stupid. Why would you have a pattern of dozens of Christs? So again, Hezekiah said, Mary is the case whose pearl is brighter than the sun. And indeed, you, O Christ, are the pearl, and rightly is the one, this one, Mary is the box. It kills me. It's just such a dumb argument. I just sat there and I just hit my hand on my head because it was so stupid. So
yeah, I mean, I could maybe see how someone would use a bunch of pearls and a Christian decoration as reference to Jesus, and I don't think there being a lot of them would be ruling it out. But I think you'd need more evidence than just the presence of pearls. After all, they're considered valuable and pretty and all kinds of things by all kinds of cultures, not just Christians.
Yeah, and this is imitating a known style of fabric in a known pattern that was widely used for various things that were completely non-religious. So, now she also emphasizes a quite small detail of a crown or a tray apparently laden with fruit among the vegetal details from the fabric-inspired design, that is, within one of the medallions. the whole of which is about 40 centimeters across. 30 centimeters is a foot, so it's about 16 inches, right? Of all of these patterns on the floor, it might be hard to see, but you see there are tons and tons of these medallions on the floor. She cares about one of them, only one of them. One of them has tons of significance, not any of the others. Pay attention to this one. It's super significant and it's mysterious, and it proves that this Kathisma Church was especially relevant or something or other. Avner, so she insists on connecting this to trays of fruit understood to symbolize offerings in Christian art, the offering of good works, that is, good fruit. She does not understand this connection being Jewish. She does not understand what the fruit symbology in Christian art even stands for. So what would this have to do with the Muslim remodel? She's like, oh, there's fruit in some churches, and so it's Christian symbolism. Yeah, it's the fruit of the Spirit, Christian symbolism, etc., etc. What would that have to do with a Muslim remodel? Yet Avner, even more goofily, decides to also connect this to a hadith in which Mary's father visits her in her room and notices summer fruit in the winter and winter fruit in the summer. This is not Avner reaching so much as attempting to grab the moon with her hands. In reality, this is something that appears in art associated with this pattern already. And given how little emphasis it has, it seems likely to just be another decorative detail similar to a winged crown that appears in another part of the design. She further supposes that this room, because this room has a floor that imitates fancy fabric, that fabric could be a curtain. And so the fabric could indicate the Holy of Holies, and she thinks that this could be the curtain that Mary withdrew behind in the Quran, even though it literally can't. And it could indicate red or purple fabric by the red or purple fabric of royalty because it's fancy, and Christians and Muslims both associate Mary with royal colors. And my question is, do Muslims? I don't think so. Plus, Theotokos' colors are specifically red and blue, and Christ's are inverted in the Eastern tradition, not purple. Then all of this might mean that Muslims thought this was a room where Mary gave birth. But no Islamic or Christian tradition associates Kathisma with the birth of Jesus. So she's like, oh, I'm wildly reading these random things to just like say, oh, maybe in the Umayyad period they thought that Mary gave birth to Jesus here. Just making things up. Like nothing she says has any merit here. So the element that actually convinced me to address this was Dai's assertion of a special palm frond jug that he is essentially connecting that spring that had existed after the remodel to a kind of proto Zamzam well. So Dai says the ceramic pipe surrounded the rock and brought water from a spring located in the northeast. Not true, it was a cistern. And again, he's being deceptive here. Zamzam is a well, so it has natural water. This is a spring, does not have natural water. This blessed water, again, deceptive. It is not blessed water. It is not holy water. It might be from a miraculously appearing spring, supposedly, but it's not blessed. This blessed water was collected by pilgrims who could bring it back with them in memory of their pilgrimage. A little bottle decorated with a palm tree was even found. All right, if it were true that people were bringing specific palm frond bottles just to collect the water from the rock, this could be significant, as it would actually kind of parallel the Zamzam in an intriguing way, especially since it can't be told whether or not this particular bottle is from the Byzantine era or the Umayyad era. But this is a blatant falsification of the data. The Piacenza pilgrim did not call the water around the rock blessed. He, along with the other pilgrims, they all drank it straight up, in quantity. Everyone has their fill of it, or their fill to drink, and the water does not become less or more. They are not carrying tiny bottles or of blessed water. They are filling up their water bottles to take and drink on the road. and it does not become less or more. It tastes good. They drink a bunch of it. They fill it up. Blessed or holy water or oil was collected from fonts that had been blessed by a priest or from the common church's supply of holy oil, the second of which is much more common. It wasn't taken from this spring or cistern, flowing cistern. It's not holy water. It would not be what they would have collected. It is not blessed by the priests. A number of fragmentary bottles were found at the Kathisma, and they are common at many sites because people sometimes broke their bottles in various places as they were traveling around. One of these multiple bottles had palm fronds. The place of manufacturing in Syria of at least similar bottles has been found where a mold for similar vessels was uncovered. These were mass produced in Syria, not local to the Kathisma, and they were for collecting holy water or oil wherever one wished to collect it. The spring itself not being holy water, and so the purpose of the container was not for collecting anything at the spring. So here are other jugs. So that shows the one jug there together with 1, 2, 3 others. So there are 4 jugs whose fragments have been found, and the palm frond was only one of them. The others all had different patterns because these are things that the tourists, the pilgrims, were buying and sometimes breaking. So here is a section from Avner's writing. Jug with a hexagonal section body. This jug had a 6-sided body adorned with mold-blown patterns, each pattern reoccurring twice. It was discovered in the topsoil accumulation together with other glass vessels dated late Byzantium, early Umayyad periods. The jug belonged to a group of mold-blown eulogia jugs displaying geometric and floral motifs on the walls, generally 3 motifs recurring twice in the same order. Its bottom may have been decorated, as most specimens of this group bear a rosette or other design on the bottom underside. Eulogia jugs probably served pilgrims as containers for blessings, oil, or water from the Holy Land, and are most likely contemporaneous with or slightly earlier than the hexagonal section vessels depicting Jewish and Christian symbols that were probably made in Palestine in the late 6th and mid-century CE for the same purpose. Fragments with similar designs were discovered in a Byzantine period glass assemblage at Horbat Rosez, that's up in Syria again. The excavations at Samaria Sebasta yielded the lower part of a hexagonal mold-blown jug, each side decorated with different designs, palm fronds, discs, lozenges, and grillwork. Similar bronze vessel from the same site was probably a mold for the production of such glass vessels. 2 hexagonal mold-blown jugs with the same designs in the collection of the Israel Museum in Jerusalem are assigned to the 6th, 7th century CE. A bottle and jug in the Ernesto Wolff collection both depict similar patterns to those at Kathisma. Their provenance is noted as probably Syrian, and they are attributed to the 6th, early 7th century CE. Note that 4 of these little jars were found, and only 1 was from the palm frond mold. So, little bits and bobs. According to the biography of Theodosius Iclia, who's the patroness of the Kathisma, she did introduce, or at least regularize, the custom of candle procession for the feast of the purification of Mary and presentation at the temple February 14th, which was promulgated by Justinian in 542 in Constantinople and had made it to Rome by 701, spreading to other Roman Catholic churches as Candlemas. So Candlemas does have origins at Kathisma. Okay, like that doesn't mean that Kathisma itself was important. It means that one of many things.
I mean, I doubt that's actually true that they invented the idea of candles, but even if they did, that would have nothing to do with this theory.
No, it's the candle procession specifically for the feast of the purification of Mary.
What I mean, okay.
She introduced
it's not unique, right? Processing of candles surely is not unique.
No, it's not unique, but she introduced it for this particular. She probably copied it from something else, and this is the one that ended up sticking of all the candle processions. This one ended up spreading in the Roman Catholic era or areas, and so became Candlemas in English. So, Dye and Shoemaker know that the Kathisma was built to celebrate Mary as Theotokos. The most common allegorical reading used there, as elsewhere, portrayed Mary as the Ark of the Covenant. Dye knows this, saying the allegory of the Ark of the Covenant / Mary is central in Christian literature. He knows it's absent from Islam, but pathetically copes by playing word games. Quran 9:19-2 62 to 63 does not mention the Ark of the Covenant, but the topics of the covenant and the temple, and at the same time priesthood, are omnipresent. First, does the Quran or Islam know that the Ark is even the Ark of the Covenant? No! The Quran knows about an Ark and knows about a covenant with Bani Israel, but it never connects the two. Second, does the Quran have any idea that the Ark was for Moses? No, it's delivered from heaven by angels to Saul, according to the Quran. That's where it first shows up. It just has pieces from relics from the family of Moses. Third, does the Quran know that the ark was ever in the temple? It does not. Fourth, does the Quran even know what is in the ark? Also, no. The only mention is it is delivered by some angels at the time of Saul. That's at 248, as a sign that kingship belongs to him. And in it are the Shekinah, which the Quran doesn't know the meaning of, and a remnant of what was left by the family of Moses and Aaron, which shows that the Quran has no idea what that is. Dye's list of supposed correlation includes the insistence on God's mercy and help toward his servants throughout the surah, presupposes the centrality of the covenant, which somehow shows it also knows about the ark. No, it doesn't. Allah has mercy and help towards servants with whom there is no covenant in the Quran. Allah doesn't even have a covenant with Muhammad. So why are you saying that you have to have a covenant in there? Why are you dragging in a Christian and Jewish idea into Islam that has no idea that this is a thing that is necessary? Then he says Zechariah is a priest in the temple. Mary since her childhood in the temple. Once Jesus is born, she goes back with him to the temple. Yeah, that's taken from Christian Apocrypha, but the temple is never connected to the Ark in the Quran. He's arguing that this shows that there's Arkiness in here somehow, hidden in the Quran. It knows about the Ark. No, the temple is never connected to the Ark in the Quran. The Ark isn't even in the temple at the time of Mary in reality, like in actual history. In fact, the Quran says that Mary lived inside the sanctuary, the Mihrab, and David was just casually hanging out there. So, and this was so embarrassing that this word Mihrab was just redefined. He also says the argument between Abraham and his father in the Quran is related to the temple and idolatry. In other words, to the question of the nature of the divine presence in worship. And that's just desperate word salad. There is no temple in the argument with Abraham in any source. And there's also no ark. He's just like saying words, hoping to distract you. It's like, glitter, glitter, look, I'm saying words. They sound really intelligent, don't they? Don't pay attention to any meaning that I am saying, because I know this is really stupid, but if I say enough stuff fast enough, maybe you'll believe me. So let's evaluate the statements.
Sorry, Mary, can you go back for just a second?
Yeah.
Regardless of what the story of Abraham has, I don't even understand why he's bringing this up. Like, so, Zechariah is a priest of the temple. Mary spends her childhood in the temple, blah, blah, blah. What does that have to do with Abraham and the church exactly?
Well,
I don't know.
What does it have to do with the ark? All of this is supposed to show you.
It doesn't have anything to do with the ark. The ark comes well after.
That Muslims
I don't understand why he's saying
ark.
these things, right?
He's saying that the Muslims knew all about the temple, so because of that, they must have known about the ark. What does that have to do with Abraham? I don't know. He's just distracting at this point.
So because Muslims knew about the temple, theoretically, the Jewish temple, the central thing of Judaism until the destruction of the temple, like literally nothing more important to Judaism, because they know about that, then the Muslims must have known about the ark and then Mary, and
they must have known about Mary being the ark somehow.
Yeah, they must have known that there was an Ark of the Covenant, and they must have known that Christians symbolize Mary as such, Therefore, this is proof that the church is Islamic?
Or that Muslims got their Mariology from the church. Because of course one of the major
But
criticisms
the Muslims
would
don't
be,
think that Mary's the Ark. So why
but
would he?
he's saying that they actually do, that they actually knew it. It's just hidden in these sources.
Like the original Islam believed this and then they forgot it? Is what he's
Yeah.
saying? So he's speculating about what early Muslims believed and then using his speculation as evidence that this church fits his speculation. I mean, I'm like, can't even create an argument here. Right?
He's just trying to distract from the fact that he knows that the allegory of Ark being Ark of the Covenant Mary being central in Christian literature, he's trying to create enough distraction and word salad that you'll believe that he's made a convincing argument that Islam somehow, that the Quran is somehow affirming this. It's just doing it
yeah,
so
okay. So
subtly.
I think I get how this
That's all
works,
he's
right?
doing.
You're reading his thing and you're like trying to follow the logic and you're like, I don't understand. This isn't making any sense. He must be smarter than me. Therefore, he's correct.
Yeah, basically. And that's why I said that these guys seem like folks who were in elementary school and high school, the smartest kids in the room, who just BS people, because this is shameful. This is a vicious habit of certain smart kids who are not as smart as they think they are. That they think that being able to confuse people and not get people so that they can't reply because they're not like parsing what they're saying is the same thing as like making a good argument, but it's not. It is a vicious, vicious habit of previously smartest kid in the room.
So Houston says that the Ark is in the Quran, sort of,
yeah,
like it's
that's what I
alluded to.
said.
Yeah.
That's why I said that the only place it's in the Quran is that it gets sent down by some angels in the time of Saul as a sign of king, that the kingship belongs to him. And in it are the Shekinah, which the Quran doesn't know the meaning of, and a remnant of what was
Right.
left by the family of
But
Moses and Aaron,
okay.
that they don't know what it is.
So I mean,
it.
maybe Muslims know the existence of the Ark, but knowing the existence of the Ark has nothing to do with knowing Christian
Well, it's not the Ark
symbolism.
of the Covenant to them. It doesn't say of the covenant.
Right.
There's no connection to any covenant in it. So,
Well, I mean, you don't need to know that as a covenant.
well, I mean, the whole point is that it's the Ark of the Covenant. Mary is the Ark of the New Covenant, whereas that was the Ark of the Old Covenant.
Mary, you're thinking too hard here.
Is
You're being too logical. I'm just saying.
But that's what
They
he's
know
arguing.
the existence of an object, therefore
Yeah, I mean,
they understand all the symbolism.
all right. So let's evaluate all of Dai's statements about the author of Quran 19:1 through 63. He says he is deeply familiar with Luke 1 and also related traditions. Counter, he's superficially aware only through oral versions, mostly based on apocryphal works, as he doesn't even know that Joseph exists. He eventually thinks that Christians think that Mary is the girlfriend of God the Father. So clearly he is not familiar with Luke 1. He also asserts he knows the traditions related to the Kathisma Church, including the Proto-Evangelium of James and the Palm Miracle, and he presupposes the connection between these independent traditions. He also knows one way or another the lection of Jeremiah, text which was apparently not widespread outside of the Hagiopolite communities. Hagiopolite is a snotty way of saying Jerusalem. Counter. If he associates both the Proto-Evangelion of James and Pseudo-Matthew with Kathisma, he knows more than any living Christian somehow. In reality, Muhammad's meddled informer caused him to be reminded of the Leto myth and incorporate that into the Pseudo-Matthew dominated narrative. Also, the lection of Jeremiah is only known from outside the Hagiopolite communities and is unlikely to have ever been read or even existed in Palestine, but was at least collected and probably redacted by a Georgian cleric. Dai says he is familiar with other aspects of the Jerusalem Marian liturgy and with the Dormition narratives. In fact, relying on the network of subtexts constituted by the Hagiopolite liturgy provides the best explanation for most of the context of Quran 19:1 through 33. Counter, he knows nothing at all of Dormition. He doesn't know anything about the Dormition of Mary or any of the Marian titles. Literally, the only liturgically relevant fragment that he may have picked up is the phrase Eastern Door or Eastern Gate, and not knowing what it meant, he made Mary retreat to the east. Also, there is nothing unique about the Jerusalem lectionary and homilies when it comes to Mary. It's all standard fare. Dye states he follows the Christian usage in composing a section on Zechariah and John the Baptist. It's a preparation for the section on Mary and Jesus. The striking parallels in both sections suggest that 1 through 33 is not the outcome of a complex editorial process, which would mix a proto version of 2 to 15 with an independent proto version of 1633. It looks, on the contrary, as a text with striking unity, whose organization is shaped by precise intention. The Proto-Evangelium of James also starts with Zechariah and John the Baptist. It's a standard part of the narrative that would have been transmitted orally. It wasn't edited. An uneducated person dictated it, and dictated it in parts at different times. So there's no great precision. Dye states he practices Christian typological exegesis. If we include the section on Abraham, we shall conclude that he knows the cycle of Abraham. In reality,
Okay.
Christian typology never calls one person the name of the other. Imran is Mary's dad. He does no typology. The author does no typology, and metaphor confuses him. The Abrahamic material comes from Midrash. So that's all, again, word salad.
And just to be clear, Midrash is not Christian commentary.
Right. So it's really baffling. He displays an outstanding homiletic talent, being able to merge episodes like Trial of Mary. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry. I see the tone now. I was just going to clarify that you're talking about the author of the text, but yes.
Being able to merge episodes like the Trial of Mary and the presentation of Jesus in the temple in a unique narrative using the literary device.
Oh my gosh. So let me get this straight. Sorry, Mary. I'm sorry to keep interrupting you, but my brain is hurting.
It's
so let me get this straight. The story is too idiotic for anyone to be confused about. So the author must be brilliant in creating all kinds of unique analogies that no one's ever heard before. That's the argument here?
The argument is that he is blending events in a form of excellent narrative ability. So he consciously creating something counter to any of the existing stories.
Right.
Because of his homiletic talent, using the literary device of Jesus speaking from the cradle. That is not a literary device; it is an event. He knows, therefore, some of the cradle miracle traditions which are attested about Jesus and other prophets. More significantly, his skills imply that he has an intimate understanding of the whole array of Christian traditions, some of them widespread, others specifically related to Palestine, since he is able to reuse them in a very consistent way, i.e. consistent with their original setting, and also within the Quranic pericope itself. He literally does not know about the presentation at the temple because he doesn't know Jewish law. He doesn't know the original material. He is arranging the oral material as makes a coherent narrative in his mind. He isn't skilled, but rather the narrative is limited by his vast ignorance. He does not tell any of the stories in a way that is consistent with their original settings. He's just like saying things that just aren't true. So Dye then goes on to say he has some knowledge of Hebrew, or more possibly Aramaic. This is confirmed by the play of words made on the Hebrew or Aramaic name of John the Baptist. The text reads that he is, and we gave him the wisdom / judgment when he was a child, and grace, mercy, Hanan, from us, and purity. The meaning of Hanan, a hapax in the Quran is ambiguous. It could indeed mean grace or tenderness, but also mercy, as in Hebrew or Aramaic. But the name of John in Hebrew, Yohanan or Yohanan, it's God is mercy. The word for mercy is visible also in the Aramaic, Yohanan, but it is, of course, absent in the usual reading of John's name in the Quran, Yahya, and it seems a bit far-fetched to look for it in the Christian reading of the same Rasam, Yohanana. When the Quran speaks of the mercy elsewhere, including the surah, it uses Rahmah, which is true. But the counter is that it means that Muhammad, actually knows that John's name is John in other traditions, but he chooses to go with the weird name Yahya, probably because he already went with Isa for Jesus, and these alternative names were probably used together, meaning life and redeemer. This doesn't mean he knows Aramaic. It means he knows Arabic, because the meaning of John's name is transparent in Arabic. The Semitic root of John's name is obvious to anyone. So he is choosing to reference that to fend off anyone who goes, hey, you're using the wrong name for this guy. It's like, oh, but look, it says he's a mercy. I'm using that name. I know that name, but this is a better one. It's probably because the Hanifa cultists used the name Isa and Yahya, so he copied them. All right. His eighth point was, since the Jerusalem liturgy was in Greek, either he has a good command of Greek or he belongs to a multilingual circle where some people can translate and explain Greek liturgy to non-Greek speakers. One could mention here the late antique Palestinian monasteries, well known for their multilingualism. Counter, there's zero indication they knew Greek, period, because it's certain they didn't hear the homilies of Jerusalem. He didn't have the full context. He did not have the Jerusalem liturgies, because you don't come out of the Jerusalem liturgies with the stupid stuff that the Quran has. When you are sitting there at the beginning, you understand what Christians believe. Who's God? Father, Son, Holy Spirit. It's repeated like 30 times in any liturgy. You don't go, oh, what? Christians believe in a deity that's somehow threefold? The other one must be God's girlfriend, Mary. You don't get that if you have any linguistic ability and access to this. So Dai also said he is certainly familiar with the literary genre of the Sagitha, and he writes a kind of Arabic Sagitha. The piece is, from a literary point of view, remarkable. This implies that he was an Arab or was perfectly bilingual. So Sagitha is a responsorial poetic dialogue that is part of Aramaic hymns. You can't claim that merely having dialogues, two people talking, turns something into a form of poetry that is responsorial when it's not structured that way. So you don't have different people reading this part, then that part, then back to the first, then to the second, then back to the first, and then the second. That's what a responsorial poetic dialogue is different from a dialogue that just appears in poetry. This could be considered more like sort of imitating a memra, which is a metrical sermon. So the Quran, you could say, imitates the memra, the metrical sermon, which Ephraim the Syrian used and chanted, among others. But both of these are Syrian forms, and they're not found in Palestine at all. So all of your arguments is, oh, it's Palestine, oh, it's Palestine, oh, it's Palestine. Now he's using a form that is unknown in Palestine, is used in a different liturgical language in a different geographical area, and that's supposed to be evidence for the influence of Palestine. Are you on crack? Furthermore, the Quran does not actually have this true form, so that's important. It's apparent that the Quran is trying to imitate the sound of chanted portions of Jewish and Christian literatures, which are similar to one another in the way that Muhammad recited things. But it does this using sad poetry, which is not metrical, it's entirely Arabic in style. You can't have something imitating metrical poetry and then not being metrical. It's a different kind of poetry if it's not metrical. It's like saying, oh, you wrote a sonnet. It doesn't rhyme, but it's a sonnet. No, it's not a sonnet if it doesn't rhyme. If it's not a metrical poem if it's not metrical. Sad poetry is not metrical. It's entirely Arabic in type. Muhammad's closest comparison is Ibn Asalt, an Arab doing Arabic stuff. He's doing an Arabic form of poetry. Muhammad is imitating a previous warner who was not a prophet, who was writing in an Arabic form that Muhammad also imitates. Many of Muhammad's sources for word and phrase level awareness seem to be from partial Christian hymns, because that's the only way to get both precision of word and total lack of context together. And so that blows out of the water all of this intimate familiarity. You would have context with intimate familiarity. So Dai becomes even stupider later on.
That's theoretically impossible, Mary.
No, it gets worse. His knowledge of Christology enables him to write a text of convergence, which could work as a kind of biggest common Christological denominator. Were he less apt, he might have added unwelcome ideas for at least one of the parties involved, the Muqamin And that's the believers, the Muslims, the so-called Chalcedonians, the Miaphysites, and the Nestorians. This
I'm pretty sure it
moron
did.
says that what he wrote was not offensive to Chalcedonians, not offensive to Miaphysites, not offensive to Nestorians. It is offensive to every Christian on the face of the earth. But he's like, oh, he's so apt that he did something that was totally inoffensive to anyone because he chose the common Christological denominator. No, saying Jesus was a prophet and not God is not a common denominator that people can go, oh yeah, you're my buddy now. You're an antichrist, but sure, because you say he's a prophet, we're gonna thumbs up that one. But that's Dai's argument here. So my question is, are you a complete idiot, Dai? Attributing birth agony to Mary is massively offensive to all the Christians of the 7th century, and her desire to death is offensive to all Christians who have ever lived. If it's deliberate, and it probably actually isn't, it is a polemic against Christianity. So is the fact that the talking baby only calls himself a prophet of God and never the son of God, and his whole mission is reduced to honoring his mother, praying and giving alms, never mind denying that he is the son of God in verse 32, which is clearly polemic. Dai then says nothing suggests that the author of this relies on the oracular words of Muhammad. Thanks to his intimate knowledge of Christian and more specifically Palestinian Marian liturgical traditions. Wait, I thought he was using Syrian, uniquely Syrian Aramaic forms a second ago, and that was part of your argument. But anyway, he composes a dialogue hymn following the model of hymns which were sung or recited in Christian liturgical setting. It's not a dialogue hymn. It just happens to have several dialogues in it. Dialogues hymns are Syrian, done in the Aramaic language churches, and not Palestinian. They were not part of the Greek Palestinian practice. So if he is following Palestinian, Marian liturgical traditions, and he isn't, then why is he using a dialogue hymn from a totally different linguistic and liturgical tradition? So that is the end. I just saved some things from something that I checked out and had to return, so I didn't have to pay for it. And that is the end of my takedown of this completely insane and idiotic assertion of Shoemaker, Dai, and Avner. Like, even Avner calls out Shoemaker for stupid stuff sometimes, but then she goes and says, like, completely stupid and incoherent stuff. There are times whenever, like, you get an argument and you just start babbling, but you're supposed to be embarrassed by that and take it out before you publish it. Because this is bad. So, any questions from anybody on the
So I have some real things from throughout.
Okay, give me a moment and I'll.
Yep,
Right
I got plenty of donation events as well. So Jack Ray gifted 50 memberships. Yes, 50.
If you want your wealth to increase in this dunya, then give sadaqah more and more every single day. 2 angels come down, one of them is making dua for those who give. He says, Ya Allah, give those who give.
50 memberships. I don't know if there's anyone who has ever watched this channel who isn't going to be a member by the time that Jack is done. Thank you very much for that. Let's take a non super chat type event here, non-donation event. This has been very early on. Jack said 9 minutes late is better than 2 weeks late. Yeah. We were late on some. We had a lot of issues getting things scheduled. My schedule, not Mary's, my schedule was out of hand. But good news, my time is freeing up. I should be able to stream more often on a more regular schedule going forward. Professor Yoffel said, now I can come Sunday anyway. Thanks to Jack Ray, so long as time is okay. And I do have a poll up, which is very not helpful at all, asking if people would be more able to make a members-only live stream on Sunday afternoon, meaning like 1 p.m. Eastern time, or Sunday evening, meaning like 6 p.m. Eastern time. And it's almost exactly 50-50. I'm getting the impression that people see these polls and they just vote for whatever the least option is, because every time one takes the lead, suddenly people start voting. I don't know what to do with that. What the heck did my algorithm lead me to? It led you to excellent quality educational material here. Tiny D or terrible crap, whatever you want to call it, it's fine by me. But to actually answer your question, this channel focuses on criticizing Islam from an intellectual perspective and defending Christianity from the same perspective. What we're particularly looking at in this stream is a weird academic theory suggesting that a particular Christian church called Kathisma was the origins of Islam, and we're totally, thoroughly debunking that idea. Or as Nisonic says, it's a strange mix of theology and pure chaos. It'll depend on which stream you're watching, right? If you're watching one of these Mary streams, you're going to get a lot of good educational
and all
material.
pure chaos.
If you're watching one of my solo streams where I react to stuff, you're going to get pure chaos, I think. If you're watching one of a stream I have with some other guest, who knows? Could be somewhere in between.
Next week.
Oh my God. So Joe Biden,
proving...
I'm sure that people will take this as a political statement. Joe Biden is the biggest idiot I've ever seen in my life. So
no, it's Joe Biden.
Mary,
it's Joe Biden.
Can you tell me what the fallacy of equivocation is?
Oh my goodness, that is not.
Just for the reference of the audience, what is the actual fallacy of equivocation?
It's whenever you are using a word, but you're swapping.
Who
out
ate
the
apple?
It's actually what our buddy Shoemaker was doing whenever he used the word nativity, but he was smuggling in the idea of parturition having occurred in that particular place. I did not change the definition of Mary.
No. He's talking to me here. You don't know the context.
And neither did he.
Okay, so equivocating is when you take one meaning of a term and you apply it to other meanings, other contexts where it clearly doesn't mean that. So
yep.
I said he was equivocating when he said that Jesus' statement that if you destroy this temple, I will raise it up in 3 days, means that Jesus is calling himself the temple of Jerusalem, the physical building. Is that an example of equivocation, Mary? Say that Jesus must be referring to the physical building.
That's very
now.
Good.
What is Mary as the ark? Is that an equivocation? Are we saying that the word ark means Mary?
No.
Or is it an analogy?
It is an analogy. It's a typology. So which is the same as what was used with Jesus. So Jesus typologically referred to himself as the temple because.
So this genius, the reason he brought this up is he says Christian theology is so confusing. Jesus is the temple and Mary's the ark that's in the temple. Does that mean that Jesus gave birth to Mary?
Yeah, it's just goofy. It's just goofy.
So this is just a word game. It's just, I can't say it's stupidity because he knows exactly what he's doing. He knows he's playing a stupid game to try to distract us because he can't defend his pathetic, disgusting pedophile prophet and his disgusting religion. So what does he have to do? He has to come and play games, which he knows are games. He knows that no Christian believes that Jesus is literally the temple, that Mary is literally the ark, and that Mary is therefore literally inside Jesus. No Christian in the history of the world has ever said that. Yet he says this is what Christians teach. All right, so here is an actual valid question from Nissan Addict. Who are the various scholars being rebutted in today's presentation?
So the main ones are Guillaume Dye, and I don't know whether or not you pronounce Dye that way in French, and the other one is, thank goodness his book was translated. I hate reading French. I had to slog through so much French for this series, guys. The other one is Stephen Shoemaker as a big one. There's also Avner, Rima Avner, who was the archaeologist who says some of the goofy things. But here, let me go back. That was 173 slides, boys and girls. That was substantial. But give me one moment and I'll get the main sources. I have it early on. And bibliography. There you go. Here are my main sources. But I have other sources that I use less often throughout that I give as I go. And I'll drop this now that I'm done. I'll drop this in my my Google Drive so that people can download it, look it up themselves, read through the stuff that I did not read aloud because the second of the homilies that were actually given at the Kathisma Church was just too long, so I only picked up very small parts of it.
So Houston says, this is what you get when academics smoke mushrooms, something like that. Actually, in all honesty, this is what you get when there is extreme incentive for creating ridiculously novel theories, regardless of how plausible they are. And that's the way academia in general tends to work, not just biblical studies or Islamic studies, but just academia in general. If you write a paper defending the ideas that people have always believed, and people might say, good job.
Although what's funny is that the opposite is kind of true in chemistry, physics, especially. You have to.
Well, I'm not talking about science.
But if we're talking
I'm
about
talking about experimental science.
Yeah,
I'm talking about, liberal arts type things, right? Where the more zany your theory is,
as long as it's zany and offensive in the correct ways, yeah.
Wow, that doesn't make any sense, but it's brilliant that you tied all those unrelated things together. So good job. You get tenure.
So I have a question. What languages can I read and how did I learn them? I can read Spanish, French, Latin, Catalan, and Italian. And I learned Spanish officially through school. I studied Latin on my own. I learned French just by being forced to read tons of French and English books because all the 19th century people did not translate any of the French. So, having had that other background, it was easier. And Italian, I just picked up from everything else. Catalan is basically a mush between, is halfway between French and Spanish. So it's fairly easy to read if you can read either one of those. It's painful for me to read French, especially because I'm just like, what's that dang word? And then I have to stop and look stuff up all the time. But I can force through them, which leaves me unprepared in German. That's where I'm just I can't do any German at all. I should probably learn it at some point. I don't want to. I'm working on Arabic. I don't want to learn German.
Absolutely. So, just some random comments and such. Mohid al-Islam, Zamzam water. I put this on everything. I mean, very good. I liked that reference there. Now, people who aren't in the United States certainly won't understand that, but I think it's pretty good.
And John also asked me what's the subject.
We were going to do that one.
Sorry, you didn't do that. I'm sorry. I was thinking that you knew that one.
Right? Good. Yeah, Cartona, you're definitely crazy. So for those who don't have the benefit of reading through all the chat, Cartona has been here pushing his imaginary theory that everything that we call Islam is actually British propaganda to discredit the Middle East, and that he alone knows true Islam, which is what he follows, basically, is the gist of it. And his evidence for this are British books. Okay. He actually claimed that it was archaeology and that he could show me all the monuments if I came to Egypt, where apparently he lives. And I told him to name one archaeological site that backs his theory, and he said Morocco.
Absolutely no sense. He is crazy.
Yeah.
And what was stolen and hidden from the traces of the prophets, Moses, Joseph, Solomon, and others. That's no.
I mean,
Champollion. Like, how this makes absolutely no sense. By the way, I have substantially read large amounts of the extant uh, Egyptian literature. I have read the story of Sinuhe. I've read the shipwrecked sailor. I have read the pyramid texts. I have read the the Book of the Dead. So what else am I supposed to read, hun? I've read the various prophetic texts. I've read historical texts. I've read a good chunk, not everything, not every inscription, right? There are archaeologists out there who have read every inscription in Egyptian, but I have only a passing interest in Egypt. So I have read most of the substantial pieces of literature that have survived from ancient Egypt. What am I supposed to read, dude? What I miss?
I mean, he has no clue.
He has no
I
clue.
asked him, I told him I would convert to his religion if he could name me one archaeological site, and he couldn't name anything after claiming that his proof was archaeological sites. He's literally just making stuff up. He has his own fantasy beliefs and then claims that there's evidence for them. That's literally what's going on. But apparently the British also constructed the Zamzam well and made sure it had unclean water, just so everyone is aware. As I said in the chat, I think that I did not think it was possible to create a narrative or religion stupider than standard Islam, but I stand corrected. Cartona has definitely done that. So Joe Biden, I told you to give me some evidence that Islam is true. I guess you sort of did. There are
He doesn't
dozens
have
of
any.
prophecies. That's a claim. Now give me a prophecy. Give me a prophecy of Muhammad that you are willing to defend. And you know what? Why don't you come do that live? Okay? You can prove everyone that I'm a liar and whatever else you think about me by coming and talking to us live at theology.chat. You can give your best prophecy of Muhammad. I have a feeling I know what it's going to be, and I have a feeling that it definitely isn't even from Muhammad, because there's only two things that are ever cited as great evidence, neither of which comes from Muhammad, according to Islamic belief, not according to me, right? According to Islamic belief, both of them don't actually even come from Muhammad. I can give you numerous false prophecies of Muhammad that are contained in the Ahadith. I can't come up with one actual true prophecy, but lots of people have made true predictions about the future that no one would claim as a prophet, right? You say enough things, you're going to say something correct. But even given that, I can't find one single correct thing that Muhammad said about the future, except maybe that his followers would cease to understand his teachings and follow some other religion. Maybe that is true. That's about the only prophecy of his that I could say has some possibility of being true. So Houston said that's why they desperately claim that Muhammad was illiterate, as if somehow that prevents the ear, key phrase there, from hearing garbled stories and repeating them. Yep, totally stupid. Morkay says pregnant women regularly traveled in the desert. It was the latest trend. Absolutely true. Gifted memberships from Jack Ray.
Brothers and sisters, why to lose this great opportunity? Remember, when the person is on his deathbed, the last minute, he will ask Allah Jalla wa Ala to be delayed for 1 second to do what? Not to pray, not to do other things, but to give sadaqah, because sadaqah you can give it just like this, in 1 second.
The 20 this time. Thank you very much for all those. I imagine we're like at 200-ish members now, thanks to all the gifted memberships of Jack Ray, but not this one. This is a legitimate new membership. Well, not that those are illegitimate, but a purchased new membership from Cheeky Shaky.
If you frequently say it, Allah would pay off your debts. So you can refer to it back again, inshallah.
Absolutely, you should definitely frequently refer to becoming a Reasoned Answers member. I support that. Church in Morocco has a very good point. Muslims only knew about tents. How could they build the rock? This is proof of Islam. It's miraculous. The rock was built, and Muslims had no idea how to build rocks.
Yeah.
It's about the level of their arguments, I would say.
The level of their arguments.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that even before he said, "Oh, there are many prophecies," Elizabeth Victoria was putting up false prophecies that Muhammad said even before Joe Biden made a claim about the many prophecies, which is hilarious. Like the bad prophecies and stupid prophecies that he made. She was already pasting them. He's like, I will go to these dumb prophecies that my silly prophet made.
Muhammad style memberships, illegitimate memberships. A scientific miracle? I don't know which thing, but yes, it was absolutely a scientific miracle, whatever you're alluding to. So this supposedly was a joke. I didn't understand it, Mary, and no one in chat could figure it out either, but you're way smarter than us all, so maybe you can figure out the joke here. Daniel's disciples and or possibly those of Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael, and was thus trying to philosophize on the Yahwistic Jewish worldview. I was told by Vessel Trinity Theory that this was a joke, and they asked what I thought of it, and I said I didn't understand it.
Well, I don't know what is that. What was a comment before that? Was there a comment before that? Because he's talking about Daniel and the three youths who were thrown into the fire. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's their original names. But I don't know what is connected to that. Like what it was that was
yeah,
supposed to
I
be
mean, I said I didn't
connected to.
understand, and they didn't provide any clarification information, and this was
Was
their
there a
first
previous comment before that?
No,
Because that looks kind of like
I
a
mean,
second
if
half
there
of
was
the
something
comment.
previous, I either didn't come through or I missed it, because as far as I could tell, this was the first
Oh,
comment.
it might have
they
gotten
made.
eaten by.
Yeah, it could have gotten eaten
by YouTube.
His username should be Joe Biden.
Joe Bida. That means
oh yeah, Bida innovation. But
innovation.
that's not the innovation guy. The innovation guy is someone else.
Yep, that's it.
But I thought he was trying to say by duh, like duh. But no, he actually did put an A. I think you're right, Bida. Joe Bida. Now this guy, this is the Joe Bida guy here, Cartona. The British, the French, and the European occupation which created Wahhabism. Okay. Yeah. And his evidence for this is archaeological sites in Egypt, such as Morocco.
Because Morocco's in Egypt, right?
He said, come to Egypt, and I'll show the archaeological sites that prove what I'm saying. And I said, name one, and he said Morocco.
So Morocco's now in Egypt. I just don't even know what to say.
And it's an archaeological site.
Silly. So Wahhabism was, in a certain way, a response to interfacing with Westernism, because there is no actual sense of honesty or consistency in the genuine Islamic worldview. Muslims, as Muslims left to their own devices, will not attempt to make their religion coherent, rational, authentic, or reflective of their origins. They will just continue to teach that you need to follow whatever the people in power tell you to do, and then you're good. And with interface with Westerners who do not think that way and who ask them questions about their religion, they went, wow, we should actually follow the religion according to the early Muslims. And thus, Wahhabism was born. It was born because Muslims were slightly embarrassed of their vast hypocrisy and incoherent ridiculousness, and how their religion was so transparently a cult, and tried to make it more rational in the only way that they could try to do so. And yes, you do have to admire the sheer chutzpah when Muslims complain about Western occupation or colonization. It is hilarious. Again, a little bit of eye for an eye would be useful for Muslims.
Yeah, and Church of Morocco, yes, you are in Egypt. Morocco is an archaeological site in Egypt, just so you know. More gifted memberships.
Early, and this is indeed a sign, yet most of them are not believers. Give alone to Allah, give alone to Allah. Ride the wings of Gabriel, give alone to Allah.
So Joe Biden did not answer my question. So Mary, have you seen what he said? Hopefully you haven't, because I'm gonna. If you've seen it, then you can't.
Yeah.
Participate.
Well, I saw the most recent thing.
Well, if he was going to make a prophecy of Muhammad, there's basically two things they would go to. If you already saw what he said.
Tall buildings. Is that one? I haven't seen what he went to.
Okay.
Tall buildings.
Your first guess was correct. The other could have been the 7 years thing.
Yeah.
Well, the
prophet predicted they prefer the tall buildings better.
Resources and tall buildings in Arabia.
No, what he predicted was, in fact, that barefoot people who were still Bedouins would compete in building tall buildings. Now, Muslims have attempted to co-opt this prophecy by, after having had money and no longer being barefoot Bedouins, compete in tall buildings with one another, but they don't fulfill the major point of the prophecy. They're not poor Bedouins. They're not barefoot anymore. They're townspeople.
Yep, and we're not going to discuss it further because he admitted that it wasn't a valid prophecy indirectly. I asked him, if I disprove this prophecy, will you leave Islam? And his answer was, that's two of many prophecies. Strangely, you knew exactly which prophecy he'd go to because it's the only one, or one of two, that Muslims ever cite. Because, you know, Muhammad has thousands of prophecies or hundreds or whatever number he thinks there are, yet they can only ever come up with two things. And they maybe like stretch it and they get about 5 or 6, all of which I know very well, and none of which are remotely prophecies of any kind. They're statements, usually. That's eisegesis, Mary. Really? So, Joe Biden, if you want to discuss this prophecy, you come up and you talk to us live. You either have to admit that this is an important criteria and you'll leave Islam or at least stop repeating this nonsense if we disprove it, or you have to come to us live. We're not going to spend the next 10 minutes debunking something that you don't give a crap what we say about, right? If it's meaningless to you in reality, which I'm sure it actually is, because you don't actually believe in Islam because of this stupid prophecy thing. Literally no one in the history of the world has converted to Islam because Muhammad said there'd be tall buildings. You just think about this for a second. Do you realize how stupid that statement is? That this is some kind of prophecy? Tall is a relative statement. A tall building could be 20 feet tall.
Yep, and that is true. Houston pointed out that there's the longer form of the hadith had a series of events. One of them prior to the tall buildings was that the true knowledge of Islam would vanish. That is true. So something that has to happen before the competing of tall buildings is that the true knowledge of Islam would essentially vanish.
And by the way, those tall buildings that you take pride in were not built by barefooted, naked shepherds. They were built by a combination of near slave labor and European engineers. So how exactly is that a fulfillment of the prophecy? Oh, it wasn't. Oh, darn. But Muhammad did prophesy that the end of the world would come within 100 years of his lifetime. He did prophesy that the end of the world would come when Constantinople was captured. He did now those are actual prophecies. Sadly, they didn't come true. Yeah. No, he did not claim that poor Arabs would build them. He claimed that barefoot, naked, destitute shepherds would build them. That's his exact words. Barefoot, naked, destitute shepherds. Which of those describes the builders of the Burj Khalifa? I'm assuming that's what you're talking about when you mean tall buildings. Do let me know. Did he say that they would build the tallest building in the world in the 21st century? No. And what did he say about what that building of tall buildings would mean? Oh yeah, that the end of the world would
End
come.
of the world. Yep.
Oh, he keeps prophesizing the end of the world over and over again.
And also that it was something evil that would happen, because he specifically said that you should not build excellent buildings or tall buildings, and that was evil. But the thing is, you know how Arabs are. They're just very, very flashy people because of the kind of culture and religion. The kind of culture that their religion gives them is a show culture, and therefore they desire to do very flashy things. And so they use this as an excuse by taking it out of context to pretend that they can do that. Were they poor when they built the buildings? According to this, the people who are poor are building huge buildings. Why? Because everyone is so rich that even very, very poor people can build huge buildings. That's the point of that. So I was asked
at
about,
least according to the Sunan Ibn Majah version of this hadith, it's actually Gabriel who says that, not Muhammad.
maybe it was Dihya. So someone asked about what I'm going to talk about next week. Next week, I'm going to prove that Muhammad taught that his God was not Allah, that Allah is a pagan God and his God is not Allah. So that is what I'm going to teach next week. I'm going to show incontrovertible proof from the Quran itself that explicitly states that none of the pagans worship Muhammad's God.
All right. So Joe Biden, you wanted to come discuss, let's have a live stream exclusively on this amazing prophecy of Muhammad. We can go through every source of it, go through all the evidence, and discuss it. You and I, we don't even need Mary here, just you and I, we can go through, we can discuss this amazing prophecy of Muhammad. And then I can point to you 100 other people who made similar prophecies or similar claims, because it's not really even a prophecy. Well, it is a prophecy when you add in the end of the world will come, but you know, let's not worry about that. Just saying someone will build tall buildings, I wouldn't even consider that a prophecy. I would just declare that a declaration, right? But anyway, we can talk all about this amazing prophecy in great detail, because I know that this is the single most important prophecy in the Muslim mind. 9 times out of 10, when I see a Muslim making a comment about why they of the prophecies of Muhammad, it's going to be this one. And it's incredibly stupid. When you look at the sources, all of them, not just half of a sentence out of context, you'll see that it's very doubtful Muhammad even said this, 1. 2, it's not much of a prediction. 3, it's a prophecy of the end of the world. And 4, he prophesied a bunch of other stuff to happen at the same time frame, and none of that has happened. So really, really bad example of him supposedly being a true prophet, because he got something right. Sounds to me like you guys are doing mental gymnastics. Yeah, we look at evidence. We look at the evidence, not just half a sentence out of context. That equals mental gymnastics. Saying, oh, Muhammad prophesied tall buildings, therefore he's a true prophet. When I bet you I can find, like I said, 100 other people in world history who made similar declarations, not literally the phrase tall buildings, but made similar declarations about their nation becoming wealthy or exhibiting great traits or whatever. Because you know what? That's the kind of bragging that people do. Except Muhammad, unlike you, who thinks this is a great accomplishment and something to brag about, he actually thought it was something horrible, if we believe the sources.
He explicitly said that building tall buildings is an evil thing to do. And all these Muslims are like, let's build more tall buildings to show how great we are.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't say anything about Muslims. It doesn't say, I mean, if we're just reading the actual words and not performing mental gymnastics, it doesn't actually say anything about Muslims. A reasonable interpretation is the Bedouins, as Mary says, but it doesn't literally say that. It just says barefoot, naked shepherds. Destitute, sorry, barefoot, naked, destitute shepherds. Did shepherds build the Burj Khalifa or whatever other tall buildings you're thinking of? No, they didn't. So why are you doing mental gymnastics to dismiss the actual words of Muhammad and substitute in, well, he just meant Arabs? Because after all, everyone knows that Arabs are barefoot, naked, destitute shepherds, basically. They're very unsophisticated, very, no, keep in mind, it's not me saying this because it sounds horrible and racist, but this is what he is declaring, that anyone who saw any Arab, that's the only thing they could say about him is, oh, you know, they're a barefoot, naked, destitute shepherd. That's basically how all Arabs act, because they're savage, disgusting creatures who are not worth anything. I mean, that's his claim, right? That's how we make it about the practices of Dubai. What an idiot. All right, let's finish this out real quick. Last gifted memberships from Jack Wright.
Brothers and sisters, why to lose this great opportunity? Remember, when the person is on his deathbed, the last minute, he will ask Allah Jalla wa Ala to be delayed for 1 second to do what? Not to pray, not to do other things, but to give sadaqah, because sadaqah you can give it just like this, yeah, in 1 second.
Thank you, Jack Ray, for all your gifted memberships today and all you do for this channel. You're by far its #1 financial supporter, and I greatly appreciate you. Joe Biden says shepherds don't build anything. Exactly, that's the whole freaking point. It's supposed to be a sign, a miraculous sign that the end times are upon you. Do you even know do you even know the words of the hadith? No, I'm sure you don't. I'm sure you just read on some Muslim website that Muhammad predicted tall buildings, and this is the proof of Islam, and you have no idea of the context, which is why you won't come up and talk to me live about the hadith. We'll read through every one of the stupid hadiths, and we'll see that it doesn't remotely support your beliefs about what they say. And you can call it word games and playing.
Yeah, my question is, at what point ever did Muhammad call all Muslim or all Muslims or all Arabs shepherds? At what point in Muhammad's life were these things interchangeable terms?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
when
it's
did he
supposed
say
to be some kind of
shepherds
miraculous sign,
and just mean
right?
Muslims?
Because you know what, one of the other miraculous signs, if we're going by the Sudan Ibn Majah, the only one mentioned, but others named other things too, when slave woman gives birth to her mistress, that's the other miraculous sign. Obviously. And whenever a scholar says obviously, that means they have zero evidence to support something. And that goes with Joe Biden here as well. Obviously, the prophet was talking about Bedouins of his time becoming rich at the end of time. There's sense. Hey, Mary, are modern Bedouins rich? Did modern Bedouins build the Burj Khalifa?
No, they're still poor and they still exist.
Huh.
The point of this is that the poorest people will still be barefoot shepherds, but they will have all this wealth that they can use to build buildings somehow. While they're still the poorest people, but they're still shepherds. This is about the topsy-turvy nature of the times and how incredibly rich people will be. So they are still going to be the poorest people, so somehow still barefoot. I know it doesn't make any sense, but Muhammad doesn't make any sense. So they're still barefoot because they're poorest people, and yet at the same time, though they are still the poorest, they are able to build these great things. Can you show me all the barefoot Bedouins who are able to build tall things? Because there are still many Bedouins that exist in various places in the world.
Yes, the ancestors are the use the wrong word. The descendants of Bedouins are Bedouins, not the Arab royal families. Sorry. You are simply mistaken. All Arabs are not Bedouins, buddy. I know that ethnicity is a very complicated thing for you, but they're not all Bedouins. So to sum up here, Alika says, why is the Kathisma Church up for discussion? It doesn't fit the bill. Agreed. Why is it up for discussion?
You're correct. Because because people say silly things. They're grasping at straws. They're looking for this alternative history support, and because it doesn't exist, that's what they go for. It's incoherent.
All right. Jack Grace used the apple to say chaos. Very nice. Houston says, I've even heard Muslims trying to claim that Christian fables were copied from the Quran instead of the other way around, which would still make them fables. Yeah, ridiculous. And then finally from al-Islam, beautiful note to end on here. Let's all thank Allah for the free memberships. And remember, Umrah and the Hajj are not free. But here, on this Enemies of the Deen, memberships are free. Subhanallah. All right. Any last words from you, Mary?
Nope. I think that everyone really should tune in next time for my evidence. I've been telling you guys that Muhammad's God is Al-Rab and is not Allah for a very long time in early Islam. And I'm going to show you proof of that from the Quran, because the Quran says something impossible to say if Muhammad recognized Allah as his God early on.
All right. So Joe Biden, email me, Thaddeus@reasonanswers.com. I would love nothing more to have an entire stream by a Muslim who is willing to defend this prophecy of tall buildings. I know I'm somewhat aggressive when you're in chat, but if it was an actual discussion, I'd be very polite. I'd be what you would call weak and pathetic or whatever. Let you speak, and because I know that just by asking you questions, your theory will self-destruct on its own. I don't need to be aggressive and shout you down or name call or anything. I can just make you follow your own logic to its conclusion, and you'll come away from the stream saying, I agree, this isn't a real prophecy of anything at best, or at worst is a false prophecy. So take your pick. But there's no way you can say it's a true prophecy and believe in Islam if you are thinking and looking at the evidence. But I know you haven't actually looked at any of the evidence because you don't. And you're discouraged from doing so as a Muslim. I don't blame you. If I was a Muslim parent, I would definitely not want my kids to look at evidence either, because even if I believed Islam is true, I wouldn't want them to look at evidence, because anyone who has any doubt about anything that Muhammad supposedly taught is declared to be an apostate, not real Muslim, and condemned to hell, according to Muhammad. So if you learn anything, you might accidentally doubt something, even a little bit, and then you're not a real Muslim. So, I mean, that's what a loving parent would do, is not let their kids learn anything. And thus you haven't learned anything. And if you do, well, you'll conclude the obvious, that Islam is incredibly false, perhaps the stupidest religion other than Kartona's religion ever created in the history of the world. All right, thank you all for joining us today. We will end with the traditional words of prayer led by the Muslim metaphysician, Pastor Jake.
Pray this ceaselessly. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me.